Hello, your channel Eugene Light Novels greets you. I hope you are enjoying these beautiful novels. Now, let's continue with the novel, Hogwarts, Fusion of All Things Multiplied by 10,000. First part. Chapter 1 Members Only. In a magic materials store in Nocturne Alley, an 11-year-old boy with a short black hair and an oriental face was observing the surroundings with a sly look. Seeing that there was no one around, he stepped directly onto a low stool, stood in front of a high cabinet, and reached out to a glass bottle on the top on tiptoe. After successfully obtaining the fist-sized glass bottle, Hope immediately smiled, jumped down quickly, held the glass bottle in both hands, and rushed to the second floor through the stairs on the side. He came to his room, closed the door, jumped onto the bed, and then looked at the glass bottle in his hand. The glass bottle contained a slightly fluorescent red liquid, which seemed to be alive, and a faint light could be seen flowing inside. Dragon blood. The blood in the glass bottle was dragon blood, from the Ukrainian Iron Belly, a large fire dragon. This 10-ounce dragon blood was already a high-priced product in his store. A small bottle was sold for 200 to 300 galleons. Hope carefully placed the dragon blood on the table and casually took out a bronze key from his pocket. This key is not the key to any door, but it can be said to be used to open the door. The counters in the store were all cast with black magic by his mother, Hanny Ho, to prevent thieves with ill intentions from sneaking in. Once these thieves set their sights on those tempting goods and rashly reach out to touch them, they will be directly attacked by the black magic and branded with a terrible curse. However, after staying in Nocturne Alley for so many years, Hope only saw one reckless person whose arm was dyed black by black magic, unable to move and felt a needle-like pain. And the key in his hand is the key to bypass the black magic, so he dared to steal things from his own counter boldly. Obviously, such a sneaky method can already predict that the key in his hand is also not from a legitimate channel, but a spare key that was secretly found in his mother's room when his mother went out to buy goods. The reason for doing this is not to resell it for money, but because of the secrets in himself. Hope is a time traveler, reincarnated in this magical world, and learned about the existence of Death Eaters from the scare stories his mother read to him when he was a child. If you don't obey, the Death Eaters will come to your door and take you away. There is no doubt that this is the world where Harry Potter is, and Hope calculated according to the time, he might be in the same class as Harry, which is this year. Hope is considered to be reincarnated into this world. At first, he was no different from an ordinary baby. He was confused until he was about 2 or 3 years old and awakened his wisdom and began to understand this world. When he learned that he would be the same age as Harry Potter, Hope's first reaction was to stay away. Whether it is the neighboring Durmstrang School of Magic or Beauxbatons School of Magic, it will be much safer than Hogwarts. But after he cried and refused to go to Hogwarts several times, his mother Hanny, who was born in Hogwarts, severely taught him a lesson. This idea was strangled. Who made him just an ignorant child in his mother's eyes? Unless he dared to reveal his identity as a time traveler and pointed out that Voldemort would return to Hogwarts, there might be some turning points, but it was only a possibility. It was more likely that he would be taught a lesson by his mother again. He had no choice but to accept his fate and work hard to become a world-shaking wizard stronger than Dumbledore before the first grade. But this was just his idea. In fact, it proved that there was a reason for entering school at the age of 11. Even if he secretly bought his first wand in his life with the pocket money he saved, he couldn't stand the age. Compared with his peers, he was at most ahead of a few commonly used spells. As for dark magic, he was not good at it. Although he has a family background of learning, his mother is from Slytherin College and is naturally close to dark magic, but his mother does not let him touch dark magic at all, because dark magic is too harmful to children, and early exposure may overly affect their personality. The neighbors around are all dark wizards, but if you want to learn dark magic from them, you have to help count the money even if you are sold. Reality is so cruel. In a blink of an eye, he has reached school age and is no different from other little wizards in wizard families. The business is not halfway through and it collapses. No matter how well the plan is written, the execution depends on the defense. Just when Hope thought he was going to enter Hogwarts like this, a miracle happened. The system finally appeared when he received the Hogwarts admission notice. Don't mention how relieved he was at that time. Although it's late, what else can I do? I can only forgive it. All Things Fusion System, member 10,000 times critical hit version. Well, there is a VIP logo on the upper right corner of the system screen, which almost made him think that this was not a system, but a plug-in for membership. This system can fuse all things, extract characteristics from the fused items, and based on the membership privileges, can obtain 10,000 times the characteristics. I have to say, VIP is awesome. The process of extracting characteristics is called analysis, and the number of tasks that can be analyzed is currently 2, which means that he can now fuse 2. The bottle of dragon blood in front of him is naturally what he prepared for his system. He learned from the system that the system can only fuse life-related items at present, and he naturally thought of the magical animals in this world. The fire dragon is undoubtedly the most powerful magical animal, and the phoenix has the same name as it. But the number of phoenixes is rare, even the materials on their bodies are also rare, while the number of fire dragons is more, and he has ready-made ones at home, so there is no need to go far. Hope held the glass bottle and unscrewed the cork on it, and a strong smell of blood immediately rushed into his nose. As if sensing something, the bright red blood in the glass bottle surged, beating against the glass bottle wall like a tide. As expected of a magical animal, Hope was surprised, feeling that even if the blood was separated from the dragon's body, it still had strong activity, like a unique life split from the dragon. Hope raised his eyes, stretched out his hand to pull a glass cup on the table closer, slowly tilted the glass bottle in his hand, and aimed the bottle mouth at the glass cup. Pa! A slight sound sounded, and a drop of bright red blood fell and landed on the bottom of the glass cup. Seeing this, he stopped his hand in time, straightened the bottle body, and plugged the bottle mouth of the dragon blood with a wooden cork again. Then he picked up a plate of keys, walked out of the room quickly, carefully poked his head out in front of the stairs to look at the first floor, and confirmed that his mother had not returned yet, and hurriedly ran downstairs to put the dragon blood back in its original place. After putting the spare key back, he ran back to his room and breathed a sigh of relief. Reading is fun every day on the 11th. Top up 100 and get 500 VIP points. Top up now, event time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 2 Exclusive Mission. Fusion items don't require too much, just a little bit of sample is enough. Besides, this bottle of dragon blood is worth 200 or 300 galleons, all given to Hua Hua, and when his mother comes back, she will definitely give him a loving beating. Just a light black magic can make his buttocks feel as hot and painful as if he was beaten hard by a belt a dozen times, and the key is that there are no side effects. As if he remembered something, Hope touched his buttocks with fear and retracted his palm as if he was electrocuted. He shook his head, shook off the memory, hurried back to the table, picked up the glass on the table, and stared at the dragon blood inside. There was only one drop, but it was not spread out directly like ordinary blood, but condensed into a ball, like a plump ruby. Hope then stretched out his index finger with anticipation and touched the drop of blood. Fusion. Hope said softly in his heart. Detected fusionable items, start the analysis task. Current fusion item, Ukrainian Iron Belly Fire Dragon. Analysis difficulty, A level. Analysis progress, 1/10,000. Current extraction characteristics, 1. Tough skin. Tough skin, effectively resist physical damage and effectively resist magic damage. Note, the degree of this characteristic is linked to the analysis progress. When the analysis is completed, you can obtain the 10,000 times characteristic. Current analysis efficiency, increase by 1 point per day, and the analysis progress can be improved through related tasks. Tough skin. Hope stared at the content on the system with wide eyes. For a moment, he felt that his skin seemed to have changed, but when he touched it, he didn't find anything special. In other words, he now has a layer of defense on his body. Hope was still very surprised about this characteristic. If there is a turtle shell that no one can break, wouldn't it be invincible to some extent? It's just that he doesn't know to what extent this characteristic can be achieved, but in a blink of an eye, this is a characteristic extracted from the fire dragon, it should not be bad. And when the analysis is completed, he can get 10,000 times tougher skin. Even if it is bad, after superposition 10,000 times, he may be invincible. Thinking of this, Hope showed a sincere smile on his face. It seems that Hogwarts is not a place that cannot be ventured into. But, the analysis speed seems to be a bit slow. 1 point a day, which means that it takes 10,000 days to complete the analysis, which is 27 years in total. It is not so long that he has no hope in his life, but he may not live to that time. When Voldemort returns completely, if he is unlucky, he may not have the time to develop. And young people should not be frivolous. What is the use of this system? Mission? Hope noticed that it seems that the progress can be accelerated through the mission. He scanned the system page and found the mission caused by the analysis. Exclusive mission, eating goats. Each goat eaten can increase the analysis progress by 1, and this mission can be repeated. Note, this mission is an exclusive mission for the Ukrainian Iron Belly Fire Dragon fusion. Looking at this task, Hope couldn't help but twitch his lips. What kind of a task is this? But after thinking about it for a moment, he found a blind spot. It seems that creatures like fire dragons like to eat goats. Could this be the reason? Well, it seems that he only needs to eat 9,999 goats to successfully analyze and completely fuse. It's so simple, bullshit. Not to mention how much money these nearly 10,000 goats cost. Even this one goat, it would take him several meals to finish, and he didn't know if it included some internal organs and other parts. Hope shook his head slightly. Forget it, it's a task to speed up the progress anyway, he can only do it according to his ability. After taking a closer look at the analysis task again, Hope made a new discovery. The analysis difficulty is S level. Does this mean that the analysis time and difficulty are linked? If he chooses some weaker tasks, will the analysis speed be faster? A trace of thought flashed in Hope's eyes. He can now set up a fusion task. If he chooses some weaker creatures, perhaps the analysis speed can be faster, and after the analysis is completed, he can set up another analysis task. In this way, wouldn't it be possible to obtain more 10,000 times the characteristics, which seems to be more cost-effective than fusing creatures like fire dragons? Thinking of this, Hope felt that he had made a mistake. If it took more than 20 years to analyze another task, then this system would be useless. He secretly warned himself that it would only take about 4 or 5 years for Voldemort to return completely. If he only had 2 characteristics by then, it would be a failure. At the same time, Hope also discovered that this analysis task might not only analyze one characteristic, but this was just his guess. After thinking for a while, Hope lay on his bed with a smile on his face. No matter what, he would have a system in the future. But, what is the next magical animal to be integrated? Hope immediately began to ponder. It would be best if it was a weak magical animal. The difficulty of analysis should be as low as possible, and it should be something he could get in touch with. Because there were only a few days left before school started, he didn't have much time left. He received the admission letter at the end of July, and it took him almost a month to plan this dragon blood. After all, he had to wait until his mother was not in the store, and this month was gone. Suddenly Hope sat up. He thought of something, flew downstairs, came to the cabinet, and picked up a feather duster. This feather duster is black, and the feathers used are from sniff. It is not a magic prop, but an ordinary duster. On the one hand, it can sweep away dust, and on the other hand, it symbolizes wealth. After all, creatures like Sniff are particularly sensitive to some gold, silver, and jewelry. This duster means to attract wealth. Pull out a fluff from it and hold it in your hand. Fusion. Detected fusionable items. Start the analysis task. Current fusion item, Sniff. Analysis difficulty, D level. Analysis progress, 1 out of 500. Current extraction characteristics, 1. Treasure induction. Treasure induction, have induction of valuable treasures within a certain range. Note, the degree of this characteristic is linked to the analysis progress. When the analysis is completed, the 10,000 times characteristic can be obtained. At this moment, Hope suddenly felt a little dazed. Unlike the changes brought by tough skin, the treasure induction gave him a particularly obvious feeling. He seemed to see a lot of fluorescence, some weak, some strong. He looked at the counter in the store, and could see a lot of fluorescence, among which the fluorescence represented by the bottle of dragon blood was the brightest of all. Hope then ran around the store to see if his mother had hidden any treasures, but there was nothing. But it was natural to think about it. This is Nocturne Alley. How could anything really valuable be placed here? It must have been stored in Gringotts long ago. Have fun reading every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, event time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 3 Vulnerabilities. Hope curiously opened the system and also found a new exclusive task. Exclusive task, treasure hunting. Every time you get a treasure worth 100 galleons, you will increase the progress point by 1. This task can be repeated, and the progress point is limited to the progress of the sniff analysis. As he guessed before, as the difficulty of the fusion object decreases, the time required will also be different. 500 points, and 1 progress point will be increased every day, so it will only take more than a year to complete the fusion. Compared with the Fire Dragon, this time is greatly reduced, but this feature is relatively more auxiliary, not as practical as Tough Skin. And this task? Hope raised his eyebrows. 100 galleons can increase a little, so these 500 progress points will require 50,000 galleons. 50,000 galleons, Hope feels that only pureblood families with a long history can have such an amount. Suddenly, he thought of something, walked quickly to the second floor, hurriedly took out the key he had put back before, and returned to the first floor. Open a cabinet at random and touch it lightly with one hand. Touched several in a row, opened the system and looked at it, his face instantly became surprised. I saw that the analysis progress of the sniff jumped from 1 to 2, which means that his previous operation was actually recognized by the system. The so-called acquisition does not require holding it all the time, but only a short-term holding is enough. His face was excited, and he quickly touched around in the store, and soon touched all the fluorescent things in the store. Current fusion item, sniff. Analysis progress, 11/500. The total value of all the goods in the store is about 1,000 galleons. The most surprising thing is that he found that the sensing range of his treasure has become much larger. In this way, the so-called 10,000 times feature does not need to wait until the analysis is completed, but gradually increases with the improvement of the analysis progress. However, when he was immersed in this joy, he heard a click, and the door of the store opened. A cold and beautiful blonde woman walked in, her tall body shrouded in a black robe, and her eyes fell on Hope, or to be exact, the key in his hand. He glanced at the open cabinet door again, and everything was clear. "Mom, listen to my explanation." Hope's smile froze, and just as he was about to say something, he saw his mother had already pulled out her wand. Ah! The magic light fell on Hope, and then there was a scream in the store. Hope sat at the table with an honest face, watching Hanny put 2 bowls of fried rice on the table. Hope quickly took it, smelled the tempting aroma, and was already hungry, and wolfed it down as usual. "Humph, eat slowly," Hanny said unhappily with a smile on her face. Looking at her son like this, she thought he hadn't eaten for a few days. Hearing this, Hope's eating speed suddenly slowed down a lot. In just a short time, most of the fried rice in the bowl was empty. "When you get to Hogwarts, you won't be able to eat these." Thinking of parting with her son, Hanny's face eased a little, and she touched Hope's hair with one hand. Hope didn't feel much discomfort. Although he had an adult mentality after crossing over, he did regard Hanny as his mother. After all, as a single-parent family, Hanny was very strict with her son, but behind that she was also a mother with tenderness. After Hope finished eating, Hanny took out a cloth bag and put it on the table, attracting his attention directly. From the rustling sound, Hope probably knew what was inside, and his eyes widened. "You are 11 years old now. Go to Diagon Alley and buy things tomorrow. The galleons here should be enough. You don't need to buy things at home. Just buy some textbooks and wands," Hanny slowly instructed, still trusting her son. Hope quickly took the purse and opened it. A quick glance showed that there were about 40 galleons, which was a large sum of money for him. "By the way, you can buy yourself an owl with the remaining money," Hanny continued to instruct. Hope nodded and happily accepted the purse. Hanny didn't know that he had secretly saved money to buy a wand, which means that the 7 galleons here will belong to him. Mom, which house do you think I will be assigned to? Hope looked at Hanny and asked curiously. Of course it's Slytherin. Hanny answered without any thought. Can't it be other houses? Hope couldn't help asking. In his impression, Slytherin was not a good place. It was definitely a reserve army for Death Eaters. What's good about Death Eaters? Although Voldemort advocates pureblood theory, pureblood wizards have more power than Muggle wizards. But Voldemort is still above the pureblood theory in Voldemort's mouth. Death Eaters are all servants of Voldemort. Where can they get any power? No matter how powerful the servants are, they are still servants. What are you thinking? You have the blood of pureblood wizards. How can you go to other colleges? Hanny rolled her eyes at Hope and said unhappily. Hope's face moved. From this tone, he found out that his father, whom he had never met, was also a pureblood wizard. As far as Hope knew, his father in this life had passed away long ago, and Hanny never mentioned him, but occasionally he would let it slip. From Hanny's surname, we know that Hope's father is an Oriental wizard. As a pureblood wizard, Hanny was lucky not to be involved in the Wizard War. During the period when Voldemort was at his strongest, Hanny went to the East as an exchange student. He stayed there for many years, got married, and had children, and when he came back, Voldemort had already been defeated. Hope shook his head helplessly and did not continue to argue. Everything depended on the Sorting Hat. As long as it was not Slytherin, other colleges were pretty good, but it was not something he could decide. The second day after the career change, Hope was woken up by Hanny early in the morning. Hanny tidied up Hope's clothes with a helpless look on her face, and then pulled Hope to the fireplace. Hope had a purse in his pocket, and grabbed the Floo powder in the elevated wooden basin in front of the fireplace with his right hand and sprinkled it casually. The next moment, his whole body was on fire, and his figure disappeared in front of the fireplace. All this was very skillful. As a child in Nocturne Alley, he was strictly forbidden by Hanny to go out on weekdays. Even if he played, he just used Floo powder to go to Diagon Alley. Nocturne Alley has never been a place suitable for children to play. Hope felt his eyes blurred, and then he appeared in the leaky cauldron. Mr. Tom, good morning. Morning, little Hope. Hope greeted the bar owner skillfully, and then entered Diagon Alley through the door of the bar. Diagon Alley is very lively as the school is about to start. Although there are very few new students in Hogwarts now after 10 years of Voldemort's rule, it is not only new students who appear here, but also students of other ages. Reading is fun every day during the National Day. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, event time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 4 Analysis completed. Hope looked at the wizards on the street with an undisguised excitement on his face, which was different from the previous time he came here. Today, he even had a different perception. He could faintly see that the whole street was emitting fluorescence. Treasure sensing can be turned on and off as he controls it. This is just a kind of sensing and will not affect his vision. Through this sensing, he can even know which wizard walking on the street has hidden huge wealth. If he becomes a thief, his future is definitely bright. Of course, the reason for his excitement is not because he realizes that he has a promising career option, but because he decided to completely integrate his treasure-sensing characteristics today. 50,000 galleons, he doesn't believe that Diagon Alley can't get 50,000 galleons worth of goods. His treasure-sensing range is very large, and he can feel a glow like the sun from a distance. He follows the guidance and comes to the fluorescence like a moth. But when he looked up, he saw the sign of Gringotts at once. There is indeed no place richer than a bank. But it is obvious that any penny in the bank that does not belong to him cannot be touched even if he wants to. Hope turned around and left, went to the bookstore first, bought all the books required in the notice, and took advantage of the time to buy books to get in touch with the fluorescence in the bookstore. Although many books are repeated, the system seems unable to identify them, and just counts each book as a valuable treasure. In a short period of time, his analysis progress increased rapidly, his perception continued to expand, and became clearer and clearer, and he could even vaguely see what the perceived treasure was. But such behavior still attracted the attention of the store owner, and he had no choice but to leave. Then Hope went to the pet store to buy an owl, but found that such magical creatures would not be identified as treasures, and hurriedly left with the treasure in the cage in his hand. He went straight home, put the things down, and went out again. This time Hope came to the flying broom store, where the fluorescence was much more intense and dazzling than other stores. A simple new model broom cost thousands of galleons, which was simply a holy place for doing tasks. He pretended to visit and kept touching the flying broom in the store, and the analysis progress suddenly soared by nearly 200 points. However, he was soon noticed by the owner of the store, who drove him out as a naughty child. After all, Hope, an 11-year-old child, was not a potential customer. If there were adults following him, it would be another matter. Just as Hope wanted to continue looking for the next store, his eyes suddenly lit up, and he rushed out quickly, squeezed through the pedestrians on the roadside, came to a place, squatted directly, and picked up a galleon from the ground. He couldn't stop smiling on his face. The treasure perception characteristics were greatly improved. He could now even select the treasures he perceived without spending much effort. Soon Hope continued to rush out, and a busy teenager appeared on the streets of Diagon Alley. Every time he stopped, he could get a galleon. In a blink of an eye, there were more than a dozen galleons in his purse, some of which had just fallen, and some were hidden in a more hidden place and were easily found by him. Not bad. Although the amount was not much, this act of picking up money was really good, and Hope smiled with satisfaction. How did you find it? Did you cast any magic? At this moment, a tender female voice sounded beside him. Hope looked back and saw a girl with thick and fluffy brown hair, frowning at him. Hope couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He didn't expect to meet an acquaintance, but the other party didn't know him. This girl was Hermione. Seeing Hope constantly passing by, she became interested. She secretly observed Hope for a while and found that he could even find the galleons hidden in the corners. She was very puzzled. She had never seen such magic in the textbook, but she asked. "I'm just lucky. Have you heard of the Felicia?" Hope said casually, and then he sensed again, but found that there were no more single galleons. As for the 2 coins, Sickle and Gnat, he didn't waste time picking them up, so he could only put the galleon in his hand into his pocket with a little regret. Seeing Hope put the galleon he picked up so casually, Hermione frowned more and more. "What is that?" Hermione asked more concernedly. Hope looked at the encyclopedia lady in astonishment, and she didn't even know this. Then he suddenly realized that the encyclopedia lady seemed to have come to buy books today, which was indeed understandable. "It seems that your knowledge is a little lacking," Hope said with a little emotion, and I believe this sentence can only be said now. Hearing this, Hermione narrowed her eyes and wrinkled her nose, as if she had entered a certain combat state. Just when she was about to say something, she heard shouting in the distance. "Hermione, we're going to the next one." Hermione turned her head and looked at Hope, her eyes seemed a little unwilling, and finally she could only snort and leave. Hope didn't care and continued to aim at the next store. Next, he visited the magic material store, the ready-made clothing store, the second-hand robe store, and even the beauty potion store. Every time he left under the drive of the store owner, but the harvest was really good. It took a lot of time to finally complete the analysis progress of the sniff. The fusion of the sniff was successful, and the analysis obtained the following characteristics. 1. Treasure sensing. 2. Digging and digging. Hope felt that his current treasure perception had contained the whole of Britain, and all treasures were clearly visible. It's just that this perception seems to only include items in the magic world, and he didn't find any pounds and gold bars. But he saw countless galleons and other treasures hidden in Gringotts. In addition, he saw many familiar things. The old wand of Hogwarts is very similar to the sword of Gryffindor, and can easily find things like the invisibility cloak. And when he wants to find a specific treasure, even if the fluorescence of the treasure is weak, he can directly sense it. For example, several Horcruxes of Voldemort can directly determine their locations, which is really magical. When the analysis task of the sniff is completed, a new feature is also extracted. Digging earth and stones? Hope's face is a little strange. With these two features combined, he feels that he has a new career plan. Maybe tomb robbing is suitable for him. These two features are 10,000 times features. Hope is a little curious about the power of digging earth and stones. He directly lowered his body and inserted his hand into the mud on the ground. There was no obstruction at all, and his 5 fingers sank directly into the ground. When he raised his hand, there were 5 finger-sized holes on the ground. Read books every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 to get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 5 The True 10,000 Times Feature. Hiss. Seeing such an effect, Hope couldn't help but take a deep breath. This 10,000 times feature was too overbearing. He really didn't feel any obstruction, and it was no different from moving in the air. No. It even felt smoother than in the air. Hope's eyes were shining. Perhaps his profession of tomb robbery really suited him. His heart moved, and many fluorescent lights in his eyes dissipated, and many fluorescent lights appeared again. At this moment, the fluorescent lights he sensed were all ownerless things, buried underground, waiting for people to find them. In addition to galleon, there were other treasures. Just observing a circle, there was no such treasure in Diagon Alley. After all, it was full of shops, and normal people would not choose to bury treasures here. With his stomach rumbling, Hope returned to his own store through the leaky cauldron. At this moment, Hanny had prepared lunch, hot rice, a dish of green vegetables and braised pork belly. This had to be attributed to Hanny's trip to the east, where she learned many oriental dishes, otherwise he would have to rely on dry and rotten pools at such a young age. The aroma alone made his stomach rumble again. He ate voraciously and quickly finished, then put the dishes in the wash basin. The next moment, he saw the dishes washing themselves, which was guaranteed to be cleaner than those washed by the dishwasher. At this moment, Hope had time to open the treasure sensor, and he found that Nocturne Alley was indeed buried with a lot of treasures. Some looked like they were buried by dark wizards, and some looked like they had not been seen for a long time. I am afraid that even their owners have forgotten their existence, or maybe their owners have already died. Hope's eyes moved slightly, and it would be a lie to say that he was not tempted. Most of the treasures he sensed were pure galleons, at least hundreds of them. Of course, it was not just galleons, there were also some strange things, such as bones, crystal balls, daggers, etc., and you could tell from the fluorescence that they could be sold for a good price. But this is Nocturne Alley, and these strange things are related to dark magic without thinking, and the risk is too high. Now he has no idea at all. These riches were buried nakedly in the ground waiting for his care, and he couldn't help but be tempted. Hope looked down at the floor, muttering secretly where to start digging. If he was discovered digging a hole from his home, he would definitely be in trouble. If he reached the top of the treasure and then dug, he would definitely have to enter Nocturne Alley. Nocturne Alley was definitely a high-risk area for an 11-year-old boy like him, just like staying in a bandit's den, and anyone he met on the road was not a good person. Maybe, he could start digging from Diagon Alley, which was very close to Diagon Alley, and it wouldn't take much effort to dig from Diagon Alley to Nocturne Alley. With an idea in mind, Hope immediately began to prepare. He ran back to his room, took out the wand he had hidden under the bed, stuffed it into his robe, and took out a black robe to put on himself. Even in Diagon Alley, there were many people dressed like this, with an ancient tradition. It was said that when the statute of secrecy had not yet been implemented and wizards had not yet gathered, they dressed like this. I sneaked into Hanny's bedroom again. Hanny was watching the store downstairs at this time. I should not be caught if I am careful. I opened the drawer of the cabinet next to the bed and took out a fist-sized crystal ball from the messy things inside. After getting the things, I quickly fled the scene. This is not an ordinary crystal ball, but a magic item. It can detect whether an object is attached with curses or other black magic, just like an electric pen. These treasures buried by black wizards will inevitably be set up by them with black magic, so it is better to be careful. After finishing the preparations, Hope hurried downstairs, came to the fireplace, grabbed a handful of flu powder, and said as he sprinkled it, "Mom, I'm going to Diagon Alley." The fire burst out, and the figure disappeared. Hope, who appeared in Diagon Alley, had a goal in mind. He walked through the crowded crowd, followed the street to the end of the street, and turned into an alley. Seeing that no one was following him, he used a large trash can to block his figure and squatted down. Without hesitation, he directly dug in the ground with both hands, and even without digging out the mud pile, he inserted his hands and pushed to both sides, and directly dug out a hole, as simple as breathing. In a short time, he dug out a hole that could accommodate his body. The whole person jumped directly, but when he was half squatting and preparing to continue digging, he suddenly felt a little more in his heart, as if he didn't need to work so hard. As soon as this idea came out, the earth wall in front of him moved by itself, and the soil seemed to have life, naturally squeezing to both sides. Hope was shocked. Could it be? The next moment, the soil started to move again. Following his will, a passage appeared and continued to extend forward. He couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. Is this the 10,000 times characteristic? This is not digging soil and stones, it is obviously the land god. Hope found that with the blessing of the 10,000 times characteristic, he didn't need to do it himself. He could control the soil with just a thought. This was too exaggerated. He thought about it, and the passage in front of him was blocked. It returned to its original state. The mud under his feet began to wriggle. He was like taking an elevator, and his whole body was sinking. Hope didn't rush to move forward, but looked up. The passage above was directly blocked, so even if someone passed by, they would not find anything abnormal. The whole space fell into darkness, and Hope took out his wand and waved it gently. Fluorescent flash. The tip of the magic wand emitted a bright light, illuminating the passage. Fortunately, this kind of life magic is relatively easy to master. But Hope is not sure whether he will lack oxygen. After thinking about it, he opened a few fist-sized holes in the passage above him, and then began to move forward. Before coming, Hope thought it was a hard job, but it turned out to be like a picnic. Under his mind, a 2-meter-wide avenue was built and continued to extend forward. After a while, he came to the bottom of Nocturne Alley. Through the perception of treasures, he could see that many underground treasures were waiting for him. It was so simple that he just had to walk over like this and take the things away. However, Hope still suppressed his thoughts and moved forward according to his original goal. With a click, accompanied by the light of the magic wand in his hand, he saw a broken wooden box falling on the passage in front. It seems that because it was buried for a long time, the wooden box itself has rotted. As the soil on all sides suddenly removed, the wooden box fell directly and broke apart, revealing the gold galleons on the ground that were slightly shining in the light. Have fun reading every day during the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 6 Gringotts. Even though it was expected, the mood was different when seeing it with his own eyes. Hope did not rush to approach, but reached into his pocket and took out a crystal ball, and then approached step by step, keeping his eyes on the crystal ball. If the crystal ball detects traces of black magic, it will release white light. The stronger the black magic, the brighter the white light released by the crystal ball. In this way, Hope came to the broken box on the ground, squatted down, and brought the crystal ball closer, but there was nothing unusual about the crystal ball. Such a close distance shows that the pile of galleons in front of him has not been cast with black magic. Hope was relieved immediately, a smile appeared on his face, and he quickly put away the crystal ball, took out a cloth bag, and reached out to grab it. His hand felt full of metal texture and a little cold. He grabbed 5 or 6 galleons and stuffed them into the cloth bag in his hand. Soon the bottom of the bag began to sink. It looked heavy. If you shook it casually, you could hear a crisp sound coming from it, which was very pleasant. This place was obviously not suitable for careful counting. You don't know when you might fall into a state of hypoxia. To be on the safe side, he opened several small holes along the upper soil wall while cleaning up, so that oxygen could flow in. After all, this was not an underground passage that had been opened long ago, and it did not have any gas. As he opened the ventilation channel, the air above rushed in urgently. He could also feel the cool breeze from several small passages above when he stood here, and he would not faint from hypoxia in a short time. Soon, he collected all the garlands on the ground, lifted the tattered wooden board, and did not miss anything, so he stood up. He did not continue to go to other places, but quickly returned along the passage. As he returned, the passage behind him was quickly blocked by the soil on both sides, and it returned to its original appearance. Back at the entrance, the passage above was opened again. He didn't even need to climb. The soil under his feet naturally surged up and lifted him up like a vertical elevator. His figure appeared in a remote alley in Diagon Alley. His feet had returned to their original state, and there was no abnormality. Unlike before, he had a bulging cloth bag in his hand, and of course there were inevitably some mud spots on his body. He casually patted his body with his hand, looking at the cloth bag in his hand, and his mouth couldn't help grinning. Although he didn't count them in detail, there were definitely more than 100 galleons in it. He reached into the cloth bag with one hand, took out a galleon from it, and observed it carefully in the light of the sky. There was no sign of decay on the appearance. Although it was buried for many years, it was still as new as before, without any trace of time. At first glance, it was as shiny as a gold coin, but Hope knew that this galleon looked golden, but it was not a gold coin. There may be some gold in it, but the proportion is not high. It is just magic coins made of some materials, so it has been buried underground for many years, but it is still like this. Such a number of galleons is not too much, but not too little. If he dares to take it home, it will be found by Hanny. If he can't explain it, he will have to face a magical fried meat. The safest way is to keep it in Gringotts. Of course, there is another way, which is to buy a purse with a traceless extension spell, so that the number of galleons in it cannot be seen from the outside. However, in the British wizarding world, such items are definitely contraband. But, he knew Hanny had one. After all, it was contraband that was caught. Such contraband was under the management of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement of the Ministry of Magic, but it would not trouble the Aurors, but other wizards in the department. Even the Aurors rarely entered Nocturne Alley on weekdays, let alone other wizards in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. As far as Hope knew, there were many wizards selling such contraband in Nocturne Alley. Of course, such things could not be found in Diagon Alley. For him, it was not difficult to get such things. Such things were buried under Nocturne Alley, and Hope could even choose them. But the probability of such magic items being set up with dark magic was definitely not low. In the end, Hope still appeared in front of Gringotts. The bulging purse was covered by the black robe on his body, which was not very conspicuous. There were indeed many wizards coming in and out of this place. Hope did not hesitate and walked in directly. As soon as he entered, he saw a spacious marble hall, which looked very much like a bank. In addition to the fairies sitting behind the counters on both sides, there were fairies in suits standing in the hall. They were short, about the same height as him, and looked similar to humans, but a little weird. Looking at these fairies in front of him, Hope's eyes flashed slightly. Fairies are also a kind of creature after all, and may be a candidate for his fusion system. I just don't know how difficult it will be to analyze fairies. It is amazing to have human wisdom. The magic talent is not bad. It is said that every adult fairy can cast spells without a wand. Of course, the main reason is that they can't hold a magic wand. According to Hope, the difficulty of fusing fairies will not be low. But it's hard to say. In his opinion, wisdom is a precious treasure, but no matter how high the wisdom is, fairies can't fight against fire dragons one-on-one, or most of them can't. In terms of combat power, fire dragons are obviously stronger. Of course, Hope only listed fairies as a candidate. No matter what factors the system uses to determine the difficulty of fairies will not be low. I already have an A-level difficulty analysis task on my back, so I won't consider this possible high difficulty option for the time being. Besides, even if he had to choose a difficult fusion object, it wouldn't be a goblin. Wouldn't the phoenix in the principal's office be nice? While thinking, Hope had come to an empty seat, raised his butt and sat directly. Opposite him was an elderly goblin, wearing a pair of glasses, with slightly drooping eyes, just looking at him. "Rare little wizard, you don't seem to have parents with you, what business do you need?" The goblin's voice was a little sharp, and it sounded a little old because of his age. "I want to save money," Hope said bluntly, and put the purse on the counter. Seeing this, the goblin didn't rush to take it, but adjusted the frame of his glasses, looked at Hope, and said, "It seems that this is your first time to save money, otherwise you should take out your vault key." "I don't have a vault key." Hope had expected it and was not panicked. "Well, then you need a vault. We have 3 types of vaults here, large, medium and small, which can be rented or purchased. The rented ones can be used for a certain period of time, and the purchased ones can be used permanently, usually for family inheritance. It is because they bought the vault that their family wealth can be preserved, making their status today different from that of ordinary wizards. Reading is fun every day. Top up 100 and get 500 VIP points. Top up now. Activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 7 Vault. Hope blinked, thinking quickly. According to the 2 characteristics he has mastered now, he will probably have a lot of galleons in the future. And the expected income is the galleons that no one cares about at the bottom of Nocturne Alley, so it seems more cost-effective to buy a vault directly. How much does it cost to buy a vault? Hope asked immediately. Hearing Hope's question, the fairy did not show any surprise. After all, he has lived for so many years and has seen all kinds of storms. He immediately introduced it to Hope expressionlessly. A small vault is 500 galleons, a medium vault is 1,500 galleons, and a large vault is 3,000 galleons. Excuse me. How much does it cost to rent a vault? Hope did not show any embarrassment on his face. Hearing the price, he asked the rental price without thinking. "We usually rent for 10 years here. A small vault costs 20 galleons, a medium vault costs 50 galleons, and a large vault costs 100 galleons." Hearing this price, Hope was slightly relieved. This price was still affordable. Now he knew why there were galleons buried under Nocturne Alley. It turned out to be this reason. It was reasonable, very reasonable. "How big is the small vault?" Hope asked carefully. According to the goblin, the small vault is actually not small. It is about 8 cubic meters in size, which is more than enough to store galleons. As for the medium vault, it is more than 50 cubic meters, which is equivalent to the size of a room. The large vault is nearly 300 cubic meters. Rent a medium vault. In the end, Hope gritted his teeth and spent 50 galleons to rent a medium vault. After all, it can be used for 10 years, so it is not a big loss. The goblin nodded slowly, without any other thoughts, took the purse in front of him, and poured out all the galleons in it, forming a small hill. The goblin's nose twitched slightly, as if he smelled the rotten mud smell on these galleons, and looked at Hope with a little surprise. Then he began to identify each one to make sure there were no fakes. This took a long time, and Hope looked around a little bored. He had been to Gringotts before, and he and Hanny had also seen their own large vault. It was indeed as the goblin said just now, it was inherited. But he had a rough idea of how much money was in it, anyway, not much. As a pureblood family, they had neither a manor nor a large amount of deposits, which meant that they were just a poor family, at most similar to the Weasley family. The galleons stored in it were not necessarily more than the galleons needed to buy a large vault. Of course, it is also possible that when Gringotts was first established, it did not cost so much. Hope turned on the treasure perception and saw that there were countless galleons and other treasures in the basement of Gringotts, and he couldn't help swallowing his saliva. Compared to the few galleons under Nocturne Alley, this is the real treasure house. He seemed to be in the moonlight at this moment, surrounded by dazzling fluorescence. In the face of such temptation, he couldn't help but think about it. With his characteristics, maybe he could really dig into the vault quietly. Of course, Hope knew that the vault of Gringotts would definitely have some powerful anti-theft magic, which was not something he could touch, so he just thought about it. After a while, the old goblin at the counter finally cleared his galleons, which were 132 galleons. After deducting the rental fee, there were only 82 left. Hope did not send the galleons to the vault with the goblin, but just took a golden key and left. Hope was not idle this afternoon. If he hadn't been in a hurry to go back to finish his meal, he would have carried out this promising job to the end. After dinner, Hope returned to his room, closed the door, and took out a small cowhide bag from his pocket. There were 2 drawstrings on it, and the bag mouth could be tightened with a slight pull. This was not an ordinary cowhide bag, but a purse with a traceless stretching spell cast on it. He had carefully selected it from the bottom of Nocturne Alley. For this purse, he spent an entire afternoon on it. Although there were many such things, they would glow whenever they approached the crystal ball. He could sense that there were galleons hidden in these purses, but he didn't even dare to touch them. The means of the dark wizards were hard to guard against. Even as powerful as Dumbledore, he was eventually hurt by the dark magic set by Voldemort on the Resurrection Stone. How could he, a newbie in the magic world, dare not be careful? Even though the progress of Tough Skin had increased to 3 in the past 2 days, it should have been strengthened, but Hope was not sure whether he could resist the erosion of dark magic, let alone risk his life to try the power of Tough Skin. The purse in his hand had no dark magic set, and there was no money hidden in it, just a purse. When Hope found it, there were several other purses around, which seemed to be mass-produced and buried for some reason. After all, it was a magical item, so Hope took one of them with him and stored the other 2 in the vault. He lifted the mattress in his room and took out the ordinary cloth bag he had hidden. There were 20 galleons he had accumulated and picked up yesterday, and he put all the galleons into the purse with the traceless extension spell. From the outside, it was impossible to tell that there were 20 galleons in this small bag. He shook the purse vigorously, but there was no sound, and he also did not feel the weight of 20 galleons. After a test, Hope was very satisfied with this purse. It not only had the traceless extension spell, but also other spells such as the floating spell. The only drawback is that it has been buried underground for an unknown period of time, and it inevitably has a muddy smell, so it needs to be dried in the sun sometime. After studying for a while, he put away the purse and began to check his system panel. With the completion of the analysis of the sniff, he can now perform a fusion. He has not yet figured out which creature to fuse. Fortunately, his family sells magic materials, and in addition to some magic plants, most of them are related to magical animals. In Hope's opinion, not all magical animals need to be fused. Some magical animals actually have no characteristics, and Hope is not sure that any useful characteristics can be obtained after fusion. And the reason why the fusion was completed so quickly this time is more because the exclusive task can be cheated, otherwise it will take him more than a year to complete the fusion of 500 points. The exclusive task of the next fusion may not be completed quickly, so once he chooses some useless magical animals, his time will be wasted directly, so he needs to choose carefully. Read books every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 to get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 8 New Features. Hope thought about the magic materials in the store and had 2 options in mind. The first one is the swallowtail dog. Although the name sounds ordinary, it is actually extremely ordinary. The only difference from ordinary dogs is its tail, which is split on both sides like a swallow's tail. It is not naturally generated, but the work of a wizard. It only exists as a pet dog in the magic world. The reason why it is listed as one of the candidates by Hope is that it has another feature, that is, it can eat. It can eat almost anything and digest it very quickly. Hope feels that this ability may help him complete the fusion of the Ukrainian Iron Belly Fire Dragon as soon as possible. Maybe he can move towards the direction of cultivating magical creatures in the future. After all, he has a system. If he cultivates some strange magical creatures, it will definitely be much more efficient than learning magic. The second option is the fire crab. The shell of this magical creature can be used to make a crucible. The key is that the fire crab can spit fire, although it spit out from its butt, but at least, it is also fire. When mentioning fire crabs, we have to mention the blasting scruts. It is said that the blasting scruts were cultivated by Hagrid using fire crabs and other creatures. Although it is criticized by students, Hope is very interested. The blasting scruts can also spit flames, but unlike fire crabs, they will create a propulsion force in the process of spitting flames. This is very awesome in Hope's eyes. Isn't this a jet aircraft? If he merges this feature with a superposition of 10,000 times, wouldn't it be comparable to a rocket? Of course, the flame of the blasting scrut is ejected from the tail. Well, Hope is a little distracted, and there is a picture in his mind, but if it can become a human-shaped rocket, it is actually not unacceptable. Unfortunately, this blasting scrut should not have been born yet. I remember what grade it appeared in, anyway. It is not now, otherwise he would directly choose to merge without a trace of hesitation. This creature is very low level at first glance, and it is estimated that the difficulty of fusion will not be very high, but the effect will definitely explode after 10,000 times superposition. However, this also made Hope determined that he would still engage in animal breeding in the future, and he could also drag Hagrid along. He was indeed a talent. After thinking for a long time, Hope finally decided that the next creature to be fused was a Krupp. If the progress of fusion of the Ukrainian Iron Belly Fire Dragon could be accelerated, it would definitely be worth the money. He had already seen the effect of the 10,000 times characteristic, and there was no doubt that if the tough skin characteristic was also superimposed 10,000 times, it would not work even if a real dragon came, let alone Voldemort. Once the dragon characteristic was successfully fused, Hope could be at ease as a middle school student. The Krupp item in his store was a forked tail, which was actually worthless. Because at the request of the Ministry of Magic, the tail of each Krupp had to be cut after it grew up to avoid being discovered by Muggles. As pets allowed by the Ministry of Magic, there is no difference between them and ordinary animals from the outside. For example, the admission letter states that pet owls, cats, and toads allowed to be brought into Hogwarts are all magical animals, but their appearance is no different from ordinary animals. Hope remembered that the tail was just casually hung on the wall, and it was not put into the cabinet, so there was no need for a key. After Hanny fell asleep, he quietly pushed open the door, and a ray of candlelight flowed out through the crack of the door. Yes, it was candlelight. Even if Hope had lived in this world for 11 years, he couldn't figure it out. In the 1990s, candles were still used for lighting. It was hard to comment. Those who didn't know would think they had traveled back to ancient times. Muggle society has already used computers, but Wizard society still uses candlelight for lighting. This is simply too far-fetched. Perhaps it's because of the pride of pure-blood wizards, who disdain to use Muggle things, or it may be because of the severance of Muggle society under the Statute of Secrecy. Only people like Arthur Weasley, whose positions are related to Muggles, will really come into contact with some Muggle technology. Hope went directly to the first floor in the dark, and with the weak moonlight outside, he touched a tail hanging on the wall, which felt a little elastic. Seeing that the thing was in his hand, he carefully returned to his room without making any sound in the middle. After returning to the room, he couldn't wait to look at the tail in his hand and directly chose to fuse it. The next moment, the tail in his hand disappeared directly, and Hope was too lazy to cut it open to take a little sample for fusion. Anyway, this tail was not worth even 1 galleon, and Hanny would not notice it even if it disappeared. Detected a fusionable item, and started the analysis task. Current fusion item, Krupp. Analysis difficulty, D level. Analysis progress, 1 out of 500. Current extraction characteristics, 1, swallowing. Swallowing, swallow and decompose the object at the entrance, absorb beneficial substances from it, and the harmful part will be directly annihilated. Note, when the body cannot bear the beneficial substances swallowed and decomposed, it will be excreted in various ways. Seeing the text on the system panel, it was just as he expected. Hope couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. Fortunately, it was not a feature like split tail, otherwise he didn't know what the split part of his body would be, especially when it was superimposed 10,000 times, then. Thinking of this, Hope couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. Just thinking about it made him feel that the picture was very shocking. Devour? Hope touched his chin. This feature seemed to be better than what he expected. His eyes were shining slightly, and he felt that the fusion of fire dragons was a foregone conclusion, and it didn't take more than 20 years. 10,000 sheep. I think Hanny couldn't prepare it for him, so he had to rely on himself. However, the number of galleons required for 10,000 sheep is not a small number, and his wallet may not be able to support it. And he will leave for Hogwarts the day after tomorrow. It seems that this matter will have to wait until after Hogwarts to find a solution. Hope was not in a hurry. He looked at the night outside the window and yawned. He had been trying to hold back his sleepiness to get the tail of the Krupp. Now his eyelids could not hold up. He blew out the candle and lay down on the bed. Soon, he could hear a slight snoring. The next day, Hope continued to go out to look for treasure. This time, he had a purse with a traceless stretching spell, so everything was much simpler. Of course, he was not careless. If he met a galleon who was cast with black magic, he would definitely not even get close to him. At the end of the day, he took away all the galleons that could be taken from Nocturne Alley, and even the purse looked a little bulging. He was not going to keep all these galleons on him. It was more reliable to deposit them in the bank. He appeared in Gringotts again. This time, he walked with his back straight. He slapped the purse and the vault key on the table and was about to deposit the money. This time, the goblin was not the one from yesterday. Although it was difficult to distinguish his appearance, he looked much younger. Reading books every day is fun. Top up 100 and get 500 VIP points. Top up now, event time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 9 Lessons. The goblin glanced at the purse and reached out to take it. As soon as he got it in his hand, his face changed, but he restrained it in an instant. Save the money. Hope saw the goblin's expression, but he didn't care about exposing the purse to cast the traceless extension spell. The goblin is not an honest and law-abiding citizen who will deliberately report to ruin his business. The place with the most dark magic items is not Nocturne Alley, but Gringotts. Whether it is a white wizard or a dark wizard, the first choice is to deposit things in Gringotts. Once in Gringotts, even the Ministry of Magic can't do anything. Of course, except for the poor. The goblin reached into the purse and grabbed a handful of galleons, gently sprinkled them on the counter, and seemed to feel something, so he put his finger to his nose and sniffed it gently. Guest, these coins of yours must have been stored for a long time, and they have a smell. If you deposit them in our vault earlier, they will be kept exactly as if they were just minted. The fairy's eyes flashed, and he didn't know how many thoughts floated through his mind, but he didn't say it clearly. Instead he praised his bank. Indeed, isn't it here? Hope smiled and replied casually. The fairy then bent down, took out a scale from under the counter, counted out 10 galleons, put them aside, and began to weigh them. This is to prevent the quality of the coins from being lost too much. Under normal circumstances, these magically refined coins will not be short of weight, but it is hard to guarantee that someone will secretly reduce the amount and make 11 out of 10 galleons. Looking at the fairy's eyes staring at the scale very seriously and his movements were extremely meticulous, Hope couldn't help but think of a word, lantern damage assessment. It was unknown how long it took before this inspection was completely over, and the card on the side was already full of galleon coins. At this time, Hope had already put on the hood of the black robe to cover his face. This time he was really careless, because the goblin in front of him kept dawdling and took a long time, and this pile of galleons had already attracted the attention of others. He could feel that people were looking at him back and forth. If it were in the eyes of other wizards, it would naturally be nothing, and they would not dare to have such an idea in broad daylight, but he was short and looked like a child, which attracted the attention of others. Guest, the count is over, a total of 2,652 galleons. Hope was not surprised at this number, because he was counting beside him to ensure that no galleon was embezzled. The result proved that this group of goblins was reliable. However, Hope did not think of depositing all of them. Under the gaze of the goblin, he took back 200 galleons and put them in his purse. Next, Hope, led by the goblin, walked towards the vault. Another goblin wearing a white shirt inside and a wool sleeveless suit outside pushed a cart and entered the underground vault from a side passage together. The passage was still the same. After the goblin unlocked the door, the cart was lifted, and all the galleons fell like a waterfall, making a clear and pleasant sound, like a symphony. He took back the key, put it in his pocket, and left again. As soon as he walked out of Gringotts, he saw a gloomy face in front of him, staring at him with his eyes, as if he wanted to completely imprint his face in his mind, with his mouth grinning exaggeratedly, like a crooked-mouthed war god. Although the man turned his head quickly, Hope had already realized that he was being stared at. He had a skill, which was to use treasure to identify people, and from time to time he would use treasure perception to check if others had any treasures. Of course, it was just curiosity. The man just now wore a necklace around his neck. He had sensed it in Gringotts. He had stood in the hall before and stopped for a long time, as if observing something. He hadn't thought much about it before, but now it seemed that this man was observing him. Sure enough, when he walked on the streets of Diagon Alley, he could sense that the distance between the necklace and him remained the same. When he stopped, the necklace also stopped. When he moved, the necklace also moved with him, which meant that the man had been following him. His treasure perception was not a kind of vision, but a kind of perception. Even if he didn't look back, he could sense the treasures around him. This perception was directly presented in his mind. Hope couldn't help but frown, but he never looked back, making himself look unaware. He didn't think the other party was brave enough to attack him in the street. This was not Nocturne Alley. Even if he did, how could he take the vault key from him? He guessed that he was just waiting for the opportunity to see if he would be left alone. In fact, even if Hope did nothing and went home normally, nothing would happen. But he felt very uncomfortable with this malicious peeping. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he suddenly had an idea in his mind. He continued to walk forward as if nothing had happened. At this moment, a bluestone floor tile quietly lifted a corner, and the black-robed wizard who had been staring at Hope's back did not notice this insignificant and difficult-to-detect change. Without paying attention, the boots on his feet hit the slightly raised floor tile, and the whole body suddenly lost balance. His hands could not help waving in the air, and he staggered forward. His head hit the ground hard, just landing on the protruding corner of the bluestone tile, and a scream sounded, which immediately attracted the attention of everyone on the street. I saw a pale-skinned wizard struggling to sit up from the ground, covering his forehead with one hand, blood flowing from his fingers, and screaming non-stop. And Hope did not stop, and did not even look back. Everything seemed to have nothing to do with him. He was also a little helpless. This involved using his digging and stone-digging characteristics, but this was all he could do. He dared to say that he was the god of the underground with his digging and stone-digging characteristics. Even if there was a fire dragon underground, he was confident that he could fight. But the underground god didn't care about the things on the ground. Being able to do this was almost his limit. He found that although he could still control the soil, stone and walls on the ground, he could only open a passage at most, and he couldn't do it as if he were using his arms. The limit of the power of this characteristic is the ground, just like the basement, which is built underground, and his characteristics are still strong. But it's not bad to do this. Hope showed a smile at the corner of his mouth. Combining the treasure perception to locate it, and then fine-tuning the ground to create an accident, it not only gave the other party a lesson, but also did not cause others to be alarmed. It was perfect. He couldn't just put a barb on the ground, just through the eyeballs directly into the brain, and hit the back of the head, which would attract aurors, although his characteristics couldn't do this. When the unlucky wizard was relieved, he looked up and saw that Hope had already disappeared. Reading books every day on the 11th day is fun. Top up 100 and get 500 VIP points. Top up now. Event time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 10 Stealing Chicken. After dealing with the malicious wizard, Hope went home directly. He could not guarantee that there were no other wizards spying in secret, so he used the flu powder directly through the fireplace of the leaky cauldron to return to his own store. Even if others had malicious intentions, they could not find him. Thinking that he would leave tomorrow, he did not go anywhere else and stayed in the store. Hanny was packing his luggage at this moment, including clothes, books, etc. Hope was guarding the store while checking his system panel. Fusion object, Ukrainian Iron Belly Fire Dragon. Analysis progress, 4/10,000. Fusion object, Cuppy. Analysis progress, 2/500. Hope then remembered that he had not checked the exclusive task of the Cuppy fusion. He was so sleepy after the fusion yesterday that he went to sleep directly. Today, he got up and dug treasures for a day, and now he has some free time. He checked it immediately. Exclusive task, dog catches rats. Drive away any invading creatures in the building where you are, and increase the progress point by 1 for each one driven away. Note, this task is exclusive to the fusion Krupp. Dog catches rat? When Hope first saw the task name, he was stunned. Was he asked to catch rats? After reading the details, he realized that it was not specifically referring to rats. This meant that any invading creatures could be used. But invading creatures? They were also hard to find in his house, especially ordinary animals, whose probability of appearance was even lower than that of magical creatures. Which wizard didn't have magic to drive away animals? Just a little potion could make rats retreat, even insects. But in Hope's memory, there were invading creatures in his house. For example, ghouls, magical creatures with a sticky appearance and ugly appearance, feed on small insects and moths. I don't know when they got into the small attic on the 3rd floor of his house. He was shocked at the time. After all, the appearance was too unbearable. In the end, it was taken by Hanny to make magic materials, and appeared on the counter the next day. Hope's eyes turned. Since there were no invading creatures, why not let him make them? He immediately had the idea of stealing chickens in his mind. Since there were no conditions, he would create conditions. Catching a mouse is not a difficult task, but he was not in a hurry to do it. When he was almost asleep at night, Hope entered the room and looked at the window. He came to the window, pushed it open, snapped his fingers, and heard a puff, and a figure leaped in and landed on the table. It was the owl he bought, tilting his head to look at him. Hope gave him a name, Geely, which means auspicious and smooth. He raised his hand and touched Geely's head, only to see that Geely did not dodge, and he could see from his eyes that he enjoyed it very much. Pets in the magic world are really psychic, more or less, they are all savvy. He opened the table cabinet, took out a chocolate frog from it, and quickly tore off the wrapping paper. The chocolate-colored frog instantly came to life, and with a flick of its 2 hind legs, it broke free from his hand, jumped suddenly, and leaped forward. However, before it landed, a bird beak quickly approached and grabbed the chocolate frog, then raised its head and threw it into the air. The bird beak started again and swallowed the chocolate frog in one gulp. Geely, go catch me a mouse. Hope gave him a reward and then began to give orders. Geely looked at Hope with some doubt, but the next moment he flapped his wings and flew out. After a while, Geely came back flapping his wings, holding a mouse under his feet, which was nearly 20 centimeters long without the tail. Seeing this, Hope did not hesitate and took out his wand. Sure enough, after entering the room, Geely's claws loosened, and the huge fat mouse fell directly onto the table. Hope waved his wand in a hurry, chanting, Wingardium Leviosa. Floating spell. Magic light burst out and hit the mouse that had just landed. The next moment, the mouse was directly suspended, waving its hands and feet vigorously in the air, but it had no effect. Seeing this, Hope couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and glared at Geely unhappily, but saw Geely landed on the table, looking at him with innocent eyes. Looking at the appearance of this mouse, it was alive and kicking, and its body was bigger than a kitten. If it really fell to the ground and ran around the room, he would not know how much trouble it would be to catch it. Fortunately, the spell was cast successfully. This was one of the few spells he had mastered. It would sometimes fail, but fortunately it was successful. The mouse stared with its dark eyes and kept kicking in the air, but it had no effect. Hope frowned slightly. Now that he had the mouse, what should he do with it? He glanced at the open window and suddenly had an idea in his mind. He immediately climbed onto the table with both hands and feet, and then carefully grabbed the mouse's tail with his hands, fearing that he would be bitten. He pulled the mouse by its long tail and slowly dragged it out of the window, leaving the mouse's entire body outside the house. Then Hope checked the panel without loosening his fingers. Fusion object, Krupp. Analysis progress, 3/500. It was a little higher than before, indicating that it was effective. Hope had expected it in his heart, and then pulled the mouse back and pulled it out again. Fusion object, Krupp. Analysis progress, 4/500. Seeing this, Hope couldn't help but laugh. Sure enough, he could still steal the chicken. the same invading creature can continue to invade and be driven away by him. This is easy to deal with. Things suddenly became simple. Hope kept swinging the mouse's body back and forth, and the analysis progress rose rapidly. After a while, the mouse was knocked unconscious, but it didn't stop him from continuing to brush the progress. He repeated the exercise nearly 1,000 times. When one hand was tired, he switched to the other hand. Even so, when the progress was all brushed, his 2 arms were a little numb and swollen. Group fusion successful. This time, the second feature did not appear. Obviously, the fusion difficulty was D-level, but Hope didn't care much. Seeing that the mouse had been used up, he threw it out of the window directly, looking at Geely, who was still in a daze, and stretched out his hand to drive it out. Geely's birdhouse is located by the window outside the house. It is a small wooden house of 30 to 40 centimeters. There is dry straw inside, which can at least protect from wind and rain. I will go to Hogwarts with him tomorrow. It is really exciting. Hope's eyes flickered. Now he is not as worried as before. Devouring has become a 10,000 times characteristic. As long as he solves 10,000 goats and successfully integrates the Iron Belly, he will not be afraid of Voldemort's resurrection. Since there is no danger, how can he not look forward to the magical Hogwarts? Then Hope quietly slipped out of the room, went to the toilet to wash his hands, and then came back and went to bed directly. Reading is fun every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 to get 500 VIP points. Recharge now. Activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 11, First Meeting. The next day, Hope slept until noon before getting up. He was dreaming in a daze and was awakened by a burst of fragrance. When he got up and walked out of the room, the smell became stronger. It seemed that he felt stimulated and his stomach rumbled involuntarily. He hurried to the dining table and saw that the table was full of 6 delicious dishes, with bright colors and thick hot steam. He took a deep breath, his nostrils opened, and the fragrance rushed into his chest crazily. Potato stewed beef, meatballs, fish-flavored eggplant. Feast. Hope couldn't help swallowing his saliva. It was difficult to have such a rich dish in the past. And if you want to buy these ingredients, you need to go to the Muggle Society to buy them. Today is your school day, I'll make up for it for you, go wash up. Hanny walked out of the kitchen with 2 bowls of rice in her hands. Seeing Hope's greedy appearance, she couldn't help but smile and said. When Hope heard it, he hurried into the bathroom and ran out in less than a minute and jumped onto the chair in front of the dining table. Delicious. He swallowed with big mouthfuls, waving his chopsticks quickly, his mouth kept moving, and his eyes were fixed on other dishes. He naturally didn't use his devouring ability for this. You have to be more careful when you get to Slytherin. Those little wizards are not like us. Some of them have bad intentions. You have to be careful and don't follow them around. Hanny looked at Hope, who was eating voraciously, and gave him instructions. Although she was a pure-blood wizard, she didn't look down on those guys in Slytherin. It was the same when she was studying. Not to mention that after she came back, she learned that most of her classmates followed Voldemort to become Death Eaters, so she looked down on them even more. Of course, there was no lack of family differences. Although Hanny entered Slytherin, her family assets, status, etc. were not as good as other pure-blood wizards, so she would naturally be excluded. However, with the target of Gryffindor, this exclusion was only potential. I know. Hope responded while eating. Soon it was afternoon. Hope was wearing a suit, looking like a kid. He dragged a suitcase with one hand, and an owl named Jilly was standing on the suitcase. Hanny took him to King's Cross Station in the Muggle Society, and observed the station like him, with a flash of nostalgia in her eyes. Let me think, it seems to be Platform 9 and March 4th, yes. That's right, it's this one. It's hard to imagine that more than 10 years have passed, and there has been no change here. Could it be that they also want to learn from Hogwarts and become a 1,000-year-old castle? Hanny said with some surprise. The familiar memory was used in her heart, and the key was to be able to check one by one. She took Hope to the front of Platform 9 and March 4th and pointed to the wall pillar. The entrance is there, go boldly, don't hesitate, I won't follow you in, you can go in alone, right? Hanny touched Hope's hair and said in a rare gentle tone. No problem. Hope said firmly, and the reluctance in his heart was driven away. After saying goodbye to Hanny, Hope looked at the wall, pulled the suitcase without any hesitation, and rushed straight towards it with Gilly. In fact, there was nothing to worry about. Hope could sense that there was no wall there. It was just that the wizard had cast a powerful magic. Even ordinary wizards could not see it, but he could see it because there was no controllable wall there. When he really rushed through the wall, the scenery in front of him suddenly became clear. He appeared on a platform. In front of him was a very primitive steam train. It looked like it had been there for many years. There were many young wizards around. Some of them even wore ridiculous clothes that were very ill-fitting. They were obviously worn to deal with muggles. He could even see Chinese characters on some clothes. It seemed that Oriental goods had begun to flow into Britain. Following the instructions, he came to the carriage dedicated to freshmen. He randomly chose an empty room, walked in, and stuffed the suitcase into the empty space below. And his Geely had already boarded the cattery on the express train, and would go to the owl dormitory of Hogwarts with other owls next. Looking out the window with a little emotion, a new life has come. There was no one there at the moment, so Hope closed the door, took off his suit, took out his wizard robe from the suitcase, and changed into it in advance, so as not to have to change after the train arrived. Compared to the suitcase, this wizard robe was obviously more comfortable. As time passed, more and more students got on the train. At this time, a girl passed by the door of the carriage, glanced at the room, and finally her eyes fell on Hope. She stopped and walked in with her suitcase. The Felixer is a lucky potion. The brewing process takes at least half a year. In fact, some wizards think this is a misunderstanding of it. This potion actually improves the wizard's ability to cast spells, not the ability to be lucky. In addition, this potion is very complicated and precious, so you couldn't have drunk the Felixer at that time. The person who came was Hermione Granger. Before Hope could react, she was forced to popularize the science of the Felixer with an expressionless face. Really? But I just asked you if you had heard of Felix Felicis at that time. I didn't say that I drank Felix Felicis. These are two different concepts. Hope smiled slightly and caught the mistake in Hermione's words. It seems that this little witch should have made up for the potion after returning. She is really studious. Hermione frowned when she heard it. Thinking back carefully, she found that it was just as Hope said. At that time, Hope just said that he was lucky and asked her if she knew about Felix Felicis. He never said that he drank Felix Felicis. But, combining these two, the other party obviously set a language trap to mislead her, but she really stepped on it. Humph. Hermione had no choice but to snort coldly. She looked at the carriage and saw that there was only Hope. She immediately put her luggage on the ground and sat opposite Hope, observing Hope with a pair of brown eyes. My name is Hermione Granger. Hope. Seeing Hermione introduce herself, Hope also said immediately. You are from the East? This should be the name of the East. After a defeat, Hermione immediately began to show off her knowledge, trying to regain her sense of superiority. You can say that. Hope did not refute, but this sentence pointed directly to his essence. Excuse me, is there anyone sitting here? Just then, a voice sounded outside the carriage. Hope turned his head and raised his eyebrows slightly. It turned out to be Harry Potter. After Harry's arrival, Ron also arrived. Looking at these three young wizards, Hope couldn't help but touch his chin and fell into deep thought. Could it be that this is the fate of the trio, and he is the extra one? Read books every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 12 Planning. Are you Harry Potter? The boy who lived? When Harry Potter introduced himself, Ron asked loudly with his eyes wide open. Even Hermione knew the name of Harry Potter even though she had only been in contact with the magic world for a short time. It can be seen that the name Harry Potter has become a symbol of the British magic world. The red-haired Ron then asked about Harry's affairs carelessly, and Hermione listened secretly. Hope didn't care, holding his head with one hand and looking at the scenery outside the window. In fact, the express train had not started yet, so there was no scenery to speak of. After a while, the train finally moved, and with a long whistle, the scenery outside the window began to retreat. Ron's chattering was in his ears, and Hope tilted his head to the window, secretly thinking about his next plan. Naturally, it was to enjoy a good time at school. If it weren't for Voldemort's existence, this idea would really be possible. Go to class normally, play around after class, find someone to learn homework from, and learn magic based on interest. In the 5th grade, I started to seriously prepare for the wizard level exam. If I passed the exam, everything would be fine. If I failed, I would take a makeup exam or repeat the grade. In the 6th grade, I could play for another year. This was a very important year. After all, I had to start looking for a job and submitting resumes in the 7th grade. Moreover, the 6th graders were mature both mentally and physically, and there were no academic exams yet. They were the right age for dating. After graduating from Hogwarts, I could get married and have children after working for a year or two. Although I could see the end at a glance, this was life. Thinking about it, Hope felt a little emotional. In fact, such a life was not bad. Of course, with Voldemort, everything could not go on like this. In addition, there was another thing that hindered him and prevented him from doing so forever. Who made him a cheater? He was destined to shine. Do you need snacks? At this moment, an old witch pushing a cart passed by the door of the carriage, interrupting the conversation of several people and attracting everyone's attention. Okay, how much? Harry saw this and took out a handful of golden galleons. Hope did the same, but he was not so arrogant, and only took out 2 galleons. But in fact, it didn't take many galleons to buy these snacks. I'll treat you. After hearing the price of the snacks, Harry Potter said without hesitation. Seeing this, Hope also put away the galleons, and took a chocolate frog from the table without being polite. He tore open the wrapping paper, grabbed the jumping chocolate frog, and stuffed it into his mouth. Even in his mouth, it really jumped and struggled like a life. This feeling is really strange, but he has been eating since he was a child, so he is not surprised, and he even collected cards for a while before. He bit hard with his teeth and easily bit it off. The chocolate frog in his mouth exploded and turned into chocolate. Hope, are you Oriental? Ron, who was full of chocolate, asked Hope. You can say that my father is Oriental. Hope said casually, while winking at Hermione. Even Ron could see his identity, so Hermione's previous behavior seemed unnecessary. Hermione saw Hope's eyes and instantly knew what Hope meant. Her nose wrinkled, but she was busy eating and didn't say anything. In fact, it is not difficult to tell Hope's identity, because his appearance is obviously different from theirs. Surprisingly, Hope's face is not much different from his previous life, but because of his Hanny bloodline, it is also a little different. His nose bridge is unexpectedly high, his eye sockets seem to be higher, and he has a pair of blue eyes. At this time, several figures suddenly stopped at the door. Harry Potter, there is a seat in my carriage, why don't you come over here? The people who came were Malfoy with slicked back blonde hair and his 2 followers. As soon as they came up, they raised their heads slightly, with a hint of obvious arrogance on their faces, and shouted to Harry. No, I already have a seat. Harry saw Malfoy and refused directly. Malfoy, who did not expect to be rejected, was slightly stunned, and then sneered disdainfully. Hee, it looks like you are going to sit with the red-haired Weasley. Their family is all Gryffindor, stupid lion. Malfoy directly opened the map cannon. It's my freedom to sit with whomever I want. You are not welcome here. Harry said coldly when he saw Malfoy attacking Ron. Hearing Harry's impolite words, Malfoy's face changed. After a while, he looked at Harry coldly and said, let's see. Then he left with 2 followers. Slytherin is nothing good. My 2 brothers said they are cold-blooded reptiles. I should join Gryffindor. Which house do you want to join, Harry? Ron looked at Harry with gratitude and asked. Gryffindor. Harry said firmly, in fact, because he heard that his parents were both Gryffindor students. "What about you, Hope?" Harry turned to Hope and asked. "I can do either," Hope said casually, but the sorting was determined by the Sorting Hat, and he would probably go to Slytherin. "Have you heard? I heard that our sorting is very dangerous, and students get hurt every year." Ron told the information from his brother. Hope smiled slightly and stopped discussing. He looked at the scenery outside and could see tall buildings in the distance from time to time. While eating snacks, he was thinking about the next plan. With the successful fusion of the Krupp, another fusion position was vacated on the system panel, which meant that he could start to choose the next object to be fused. This was not urgent. Compared with the previous time, he could choose carefully this time, and he did not have to require a low-difficulty magical creature. Because his devouring characteristics were determined, the fusion of the Ukrainian Iron Belly Fire Dragon could actually be said to be just around the corner, and it would no longer take an exaggerated 20 years. As long as the problem of goats could be solved next, 10,000 goats would only be a matter of time. Because he had not tried the devouring characteristics yet, Hope was not sure how much time it would take. In addition, there was the problem of galleons. Although he now had more than 2,000 galleons in his savings, he was considered a wealthy member among any student. But what he needed was 10,000 sheep, even if one sheep cost 1 galleon, and he would need 10,000 galleons. Of course, he did not think that a sheep would be so cheap. So he still needed to solve the galleon problem, and all this needed to be solved after arriving at Hogwarts. However, he has treasure perception, so galleon is definitely not a problem, but it may be a little troublesome. Have fun reading every day during the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 13 The Sword. In any case, the fusion of the Fire Dragon has been put on the agenda, indicating that there will be another vacancy, so this time the fusion can be slightly more difficult. Hope has not yet thought about the specific choice, and when Hogwarts arrives, he needs to find materials for magical creatures. Hope has already had an idea in his mind. The place with the most materials is not any professor's office, but Hagrid's hut. Moreover, Hagrid is a rare genius, and the matter of exploding Skrut will fall on Hagrid, so it is imperative to make friends with Hagrid. Hope raised his head slightly. Perhaps he needs to prepare a gift. What is more suitable? Time passed slowly, the sky outside the window gradually dimmed, and night was about to come. However, the train was about to arrive at the station at this time, and everyone began to prepare to get off. They did not need to take the suitcases off the train, and there would be house elves to help deliver the suitcases to their dormitories. As soon as they got off the train, they saw the huge Hagrid, who looked as tall as a floor. "We took a boat to the gate of Hogwarts and came to the auditorium as soon as we entered." A bunch of little wizards were chattering, their faces were both excited and worried about the sorting ceremony. Hope looked normal, observing the 1,000-year-old castle. Under the guidance of Professor McGonagall, we entered the door of the auditorium, and the scene suddenly became clear. This auditorium was much more spacious than Hope had expected, and it was not so crowded. At this moment, all the students except the freshmen had sat down, and many eyes fell on them. More of them were looking for the boy who survived the catastrophe. A group of professors sat in the professor seats in front. Professor McGonagall walked to a chair with a list of freshmen in her hand. On the chair was a weathered and patched hat, which looked particularly dirty. "You know, something will be covered with dust in just 1 month, let alone a 1,000-year-old hat. Maybe he can still find traces of 1,000 years ago on the sorting hat?" As the sorting ceremony began, Hope looked at the sorting hat. He turned on the treasure perception, and the fluorescence of the sorting hat alone was enough to tell that this was a rare treasure. But there was a more dazzling fluorescence hidden in this fluorescence, which was a sword. The Gryffindor sword. Hope saw the appearance of this sword very clearly, hidden in the sorting hat. Harry Potter. Unconsciously, Professor McGonagall had called Harry Potter's name. There was no surprise in the result. Harry went to Gryffindor. As the result of the sorting hat was announced, there was a fierce applause from the Gryffindor dining table. Hope. The next name was Hope. In the eyes of everyone, Hope slowly walked out and came to the sorting hat. Unexpectedly, there was still some tension in the end. Hope immediately showed a smile, and looked forward to it. He picked up the sorting hat, put it on his head, and then sat down. Because the heads of these little wizards are still a little different from those of adult wizards, half of their heads are directly stuck in the sorting hat. Let the sorting hat see which house you are suitable for. Hope suddenly heard the slightly exaggerated voice of the sorting hat, which kept talking, as if it could talk all day even if no one responded. The slightly noisy voice could be compared with the little wizard. Hope gradually became distracted by the voice and did not listen carefully to what the sorting hat kept talking about. Instead, he sensed the Gryffindor sword. This was not difficult for him at all. The sword was hidden vertically in the sorting hat. Hope should be thankful that the sword was pointed up and the hilt was down, otherwise he would never dare to wear this hat. If the tip of the sword was facing down, then this hat would not be called the sorting hat, but the execution hat or the beheading hat. Hope raised his head slightly, and the sword was on his head. He even felt that he could touch it. As this idea came out, he seemed to really touch the hilt of the sword. Hope was stunned, and felt a heavy feeling on his head. He was still a little unsure, so he shook his head immediately. However, with this shake of his head, the hilt of the sword deviated from his short-haired head and fell directly. The sharp blade passed by his face, almost close to his body, and Hope's heart suddenly tightened, and his heart felt a little cold. Snap! The sword with rubies inlaid on the hilt hit the chair and finally fell to the ground. In an instant, the whole auditorium was quiet, and everyone's eyes were looking at the sword on the ground, a little confused. What is going on? There have been so many sorting ceremonies before, and there has never been such a thing, and I have never heard of such a period from the old man. After a moment, the whole auditorium was noisy, and all the students were discussing what was going on. Dumbledore, who was sitting in the professor's seat, looked at the sword on the ground. His eyes flickered slightly, with a hint of surprise. Some other professors knew what this was, and some saw it for the first time, and were as confused as the students. McGonagall was right next to Hope. Seeing this, her eyes sparkled slightly under her glasses. As the head of Gryffindor, she naturally knew what this was. And this was the first time she had encountered such a situation in all her years of teaching, and she had never heard of such a situation before. This was the sword left by the founder of Gryffindor, but it suddenly appeared in the sorting ceremony of a freshman. There must be some meaning in it. Oh! The sword of Gryffindor. You actually took it out. There is no doubt that you are a natural Gryffindor. At this moment, the sorting hat seemed to be a cell phone that suddenly turned up. The huge sound rang in Hope's mind, making his brain numb, and he almost pulled the sorting hat off and threw it on the ground. Gryffindor. The sorting hat shouted loudly, and the students on the Gryffindor side didn't care about the doubts in an instant, and also applauded. When Hope heard it, he immediately took off the sorting hat. Pick up this sword of Gryffindor and put it in the sorting hat, Mr. Hope. It appeared because of you, so you have to put it back. McGregor said with a kind face, which surprised the Gryffindor students. The dean usually had a stern face most of the time. Of course, the main reason was that those Gryffindor students who looked like monkeys made McGregor have to have a stern face all the time. Hope heard it and obediently picked up the sword of Gryffindor on the ground. It felt a little heavy in his hand, and he could clearly see a name engraved on the sword. Godric Gryffindor. Have fun reading every day during the 11th. Recharge 100 to get 500 VIP points. Recharge now. Activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 14 Sudden Hope. In front of everyone, Hope held the Gryffindor sword and stabbed the tip of the sword into the bottom of the sorting hat. At first glance, it seemed like a murder scene. After completing this operation, Hope put the sorting hat on the chair and walked straight to the dining table belonging to Gryffindor. Professor McGonagall, what is that sword? At this moment, the red-haired Fred Weasley asked curiously, and everyone else looked at Professor McGonagall, obviously wanting to know the answer. Professor McGonagall hesitated a little when she saw this, turned her head and looked at Dumbledore, and felt Dumbledore's eyes, and then said it solemnly. This is the sword left by Godric Gryffindor, one of the founders of Hogwarts. It is said that only a true Gryffindor can take this sword out of the sorting hat. This sentence is like praising Hope. Hearing this, Hope couldn't help but shrugged, but she didn't know what expression Hanny would have when she knew the news. So my son is a real Gryffindor. People from other colleges were fine, but Gryffindor students couldn't help but freeze when they heard this. They all turned their eyes to Hope, observing what was special about this freshman who was praised by Professor McGonagall as a real Gryffindor. Then, the Gryffindors looked at the Sorting Hat with fiery eyes. If there were not so many professors present, they might have gone straight up to grab it to prove that they were also real Gryffindors. Seeing the eyes of these little lions, McGonagall felt a headache. She could already foresee that these naughty students would focus their attention on the Sorting Hat next. But in a flash, the Sorting Hat is usually placed in the principal's office. Can they still get into the principal's office? But thinking about it carefully, it is not impossible. For these little lions, proving that they are real Gryffindors is too tempting. Besides, he will only be drawn when needed. Mr. Hope is just a special case. Professor McGonagall added immediately. But it's useless. Who is not a special case? As the sorting ceremony ended, Dumbledore began to speak, and the banquet officially began. Although it was not as delicious as Chinese food, it was at least a very sumptuous meal. But Hope did not expect that he would become another celebrity among the freshmen. Many senior Gryffindors took the initiative to find him. Another celebrity is naturally Harry Potter. It is rumored that he who defeated Voldemort is not comparable to Hope, a real Gryffindor. Fortunately, Harry Potter attracted firepower for him, so Hope could finish this meal safely. While eating, he thought that he was not a real Gryffindor. The reason for this was mostly due to the treasure perception characteristics. It seems that because it was perceived, it was obtained. This is an important discovery. Bypassing the magic set on the Sorting Hat, this is very magical. I didn't expect that treasure perception has such a function. This made Hope think about it. You know, there is another thing in this 1,000-year-old castle that has been tempting him like the red sun. Philosopher's Stone. Hope naturally thought about this thing and was very interested. Whether it is the powerful ability to turn stone into gold or the ability to create elixir of life, it is enough to show its preciousness. Moreover, Hope also has a system for the fusion of all things. Although it can only fuse living things at present, it is known as the fusion of all things. Who says that it cannot fuse non-living objects in the future? Just from the abilities of the Philosopher's Stone itself, Hope knew that the properties that would be mastered after the successful fusion would definitely not be simple. Turning stones into gold? Or immortality? But he also knew his abilities. It would be difficult to successfully steal the Philosopher's Stone from Dumbledore's eyes. He had the sense of treasures and could know where the Philosopher's Stone was hidden without going through the layers of checkpoints set by those professors. Then he could use the characteristics of digging soil and stones to directly open the passage and reach the location of the Philosopher's Stone. This was not difficult for him. But he knew that there was another level to steal the Philosopher's Stone, which was the Mirror of Erist. The Philosopher's Stone was hidden in the Mirror of Erist. Only those who wanted to get the Philosopher's Stone but didn't want to use it could take it out of the mirror. This was a very spiritual test. Who would not be greedy for such a thing? At least Hope couldn't do it. He thought that after getting the Philosopher's Stone, wouldn't it be like mastering a money printing field, and money could be printed at will? But now it seems that maybe he can really bypass the Mirror of Erist and get the Philosopher's Stone. Thinking of this, Hope found that his heart was beating wildly, as if urging him to act immediately, and there was a glimmer in his eyes. He had already made a decision in his heart. Since there was a chance of success, he naturally had to give it a try. Try it, the bicycle becomes a motorcycle. But there was no rush for this matter, and he still had to think about it in the long run. Hope exhaled slightly and dispelled the evil thoughts in his heart. The Philosopher's Stone stayed in the Mirror of Erist like this, and there would be no changes in the short term. Even if there were changes, he could sense them. Since he wanted to take risks, it was best to wait until he had a greater grasp to avoid sudden changes. After all, there were more people staring at the Philosopher's Stone. Thinking of this, Hope couldn't help but look up and look at Professor Quirrell in the professor's seat. The purple turban wrapped around his head looked very strange, but Hope knew that the remnant soul of Voldemort was hidden under the turban. Anyway, the matter of the Philosopher's Stone was not urgent, so he would see if he could come up with new characteristics before that. Even if the multiplier of tough skin was increased a little more, it would be much safer. Time passed slowly, and the matriculation banquet finally ended. The next step was to return to the Gryffindor common room under the leadership of the class leader. A group of freshmen followed to the 7th floor, and Hope met the guardian of Gryffindor, the fat lady. After answering the password, the door of the Gryffindor common room opened, and everyone entered in an orderly manner. The common room is a slightly warm room, with 2 spiral staircases on one side of the room, one leading to the boys' dormitory and the other to the girls' dormitory. Following the class leader to their dormitory, Hope was surprised to find that he was actually in the same dormitory with Harry and others. There were 4 people in a dormitory, and in addition to him and Harry, the remaining 2 were Ron and Neville Longbottom. However, there were not many freshmen in this class, and the probability of being assigned together was not low. He just thought it was a coincidence. Until he walked into this dormitory, he found a bald dwarf with pointed ears and big eyes walked in, wearing a dirty piece of clothing, and it turned out to be a house elf. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hope, I sent your suitcase to the wrong place." The house elf showed a guilty look and said a little uneasy. "Have fun reading every day during the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 15 Student Life. After asking, Hope realized that his luggage was mixed up with that of another Gryffindor freshman. Listening to the explanation of the house elf, Hope's eyes flickered slightly, as if their luggage was the only one in the whole Hogwarts that was sent to the wrong place. This inevitably made Hope think too much. Maybe it was not sent to the wrong place, but he was temporarily transferred to another dormitory? Before the freshmen were sorted, these luggage were first guarded by the house elves, and after the sorting, their luggage was hurriedly sent to each dormitory. Hope glanced at the other 3 people in the dormitory and suddenly found that the origins of the other 2 people except Harry were very reliable. Ron is a typical Weasley, needless to say, and Neville's parents are both Aurors and members of the Order of the Phoenix. It can be said that they are the 2nd generation of Dumbledore. If this kind of sorting is not a coincidence, but a roommate carefully selected by Dumbledore for Harry, then it makes sense. Would Dumbledore do this? It's really possible. The person who originally appeared in this dormitory was not Hope, but when Hope became a real Gryffindor by chance, he was transferred to this dormitory. Hope felt that he had caught the truth, but it could not be confirmed. "It's okay, what's your name?" Hope waved his hand casually, not caring, and asked the name of the house elf in front of him. "Mr. Hope, my name is Bitten." The house elf didn't expect Hope to ask his name, and he panicked and almost forgot his name. "Thank you, Mr. Bitten, you helped me solve a problem." Hope showed a gentle smile and said to Bitten gently, "It's nothing, it's our honor, sir." Hearing Hope's thanks, Bitten was a little overwhelmed, but there was still some joy in his eyes. After all, he was recognized. Before Hope had time to chat for a few words, the house elf ran away directly on the grounds of work, which made Hope a little regretful. It is rumored that there are hundreds of house elves in Hogwarts. There is no doubt that this force ensures the stable operation of Hogwarts and involves all aspects of Hogwarts. Hope wanted to make friends with a house elf because they were also responsible for the kitchen. He would inevitably have to cook for himself later, so he prepared in advance. Although Beaton ran away, at least he knew his name. 3 days passed in a blink of an eye. Hope did not do much in these 3 days. He just went to class honestly and hung out with Harry and the others in his spare time. He originally thought that he was a good seedling who would study hard and improve every day, but after only 3 days, he knew that he was not. There was no way. This magic was far from as simple as he imagined, and it contained a lot of knowledge points. To successfully cast a spell, you need to pay attention to all aspects. Not only do you have to recite the spell accurately, not a single bite can be wrong, but the gesture of waving the wand must be accurate and correct. Any mistake will cause the magic to fail to be cast successfully. And to be proficient in casting spells, you need to practice a lot day by day. What's even more outrageous is that magic, in addition to spells and hand gestures, also relies on the heart. Or emotions. If the emotions are not right, they cannot be successfully performed, which is very metaphysical, and he doesn't even know what's wrong. His talent is just average, and his diligence is just okay. He is the kind of person who listens carefully in class but forgets everything after class. He basically doesn't spend any time reviewing after class. It feels that except for the word magic, it is no different from going to school. He can't get obvious and effective quick feedback, which causes Hope's interest to drop a lot. In addition to spells, there are other courses. Among them, herbology and history of magic are the most boring courses Hope has ever taken. Herbology is full of knowledge points, just knowledge points. Hope really wants to remember them carefully, but he is always wandering in the sky and dazed. There is nothing to say about the history of magic. The only thing that can be commented on is that the hypnosis effect is really good. Professor Spence in the Ghost State teaches the history of magic, which is really no different from the heavenly book, just like a Buddha chanting scriptures in his ear. The defense against the dark arts class taught by Professor Quirrell, who has Voldemort hidden in his body, was somewhat unexpected to Hope. This was one of the few courses he could listen to. Apart from his strange smell, Quirrell's teaching style was quite humorous, which was rare in other professors. Perhaps because of his youth, Professor Quirrell talked about a lot of his travels, and in the process, he inserted knowledge about how to deal with those evil magical creatures, which was very vivid. Of course, Hope did not forget that the defense against the dark arts class was a hands-on course. After all, if he really encountered danger, he could not rely on these humorous experiences to duel with evil magical creatures, but this point Professor Quirrell seemed to have forgotten. I just don't know if Voldemort's instructions were behind this. Well, in just 3 days, Hope was convinced that his identity as a poor student had not changed because of the crossing. So he could only put his hope on the system. These days, he has also thought about the next object to merge with. He was still hesitating, but the frustration of being a poor student made him make a decision. He aimed at the house elves. Although these servants of wizards are humble, they have strong magical talents. Almost every house elf has the ability to cast spells without a wand, and also has superb apparition ability, which can even break through Hogwarts anti-apparition. This is actually incredible. You should know that Hogwarts has been trying to prevent other wizards from easily entering Hogwarts. Not only is there anti-apparition magic in the Hogwarts campus, but there is also no flow pipeline. Students can easily reach Hogwarts through flow powder, but they have to take the risk of going to the station of Muggle society to take a magic train. On the one hand, it is for the safety of students, and on the other hand, it is indeed to prevent wizards from easily entering Hogwarts. Of course, no matter how hard the school tries, it cannot avoid the secret passages that have been passed down in this castle. It is a leaky sieve in itself, and no matter how you try to block it, it is useless. So Hope thought that the magical talent of house elves would not be too bad, but he also thought that this was because they had lived for a long time, and the so-called ability to break through the anti-apparition magic of Hogwarts might be because the anti-apparition magic targets people. But Hope planned to take a gamble. At the very least, there was a guaranteed explosion rate of 10,000 times. No matter how useless the characteristics were, they could become magical skills in front of 10,000 times. Have fun reading books every day during the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now. Activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 16 Snape. However, if you want to get some samples of house elves, you still need to think of some ways. There are no materials for house elves on the market. After all, there are no wild house elves. Fortunately, Hogwarts is the largest gathering place for house elves in the UK. Maybe he should take some time to go to the kitchen. These house elves usually don't appear in front of students on weekdays. On Thursday morning, Hope was eating breakfast in the auditorium, but his face was not very good. The breakfast here is not bad. It was acceptable at first, but now he already missed the hot meat buns. At this time, a group of owls flew in from outside, delivering letters or parcels as usual. Hope also received a letter from Hanny on the first day of formal classes, asking him if he was used to school, but he didn't think of asking which college he was assigned to. Obviously thought it was a done deal. Hope thought about it, so he didn't take the initiative to tell Hanny about it, and planned to see when Hanny would ask about it. If Hope hadn't asked, he would have told her when he graduated. I believe Hanny would have looked very happy at that time. Today's candy has arrived. Who wants it? Malfoy's voice was heard in his ears. He looked up and saw Malfoy tearing open the package in his hand with a proud look on his face. In fact, this has been going on since the first day. To Hope, it seemed like a takeaway ordered from outside the school every day. Thinking of this, Hope raised his eyebrows slightly. Since candy can be sent, maybe even food can be sent by mail. Anyway, it was his owl Geely who did the hard work, so he would just treat it as a daily exercise. Hope thought so and prepared to find time to send a letter to Hanny. Showing off again. As if he was afraid that others didn't know that his family was rich. Ron looked at Malfoy's appearance and immediately complained. Hey, Harry. Do you have anything too? Who sent it to you? Ron saw Harry opening a letter and couldn't help asking. It's Hagrid. He invited me to visit his home on Friday afternoon. Hearing this, Hope raised his head. He was no longer sleepy when he heard this. But he didn't rush to speak, but prepared to find a suitable time. Neville, you have something too. Ron looked at Neville again and found that even Neville had something. His eyes fell on Hope, and he seemed relieved to see that Hope didn't receive anything. This is what my grandma sent me. It's called a memory ball. If I forget something, it will remind me. Neville held up the glass ball in his hand and showed it to everyone. But at this moment, a hand suddenly reached out and snatched the glass ball from Neville's hand. Malfoy. Harry and others exclaimed angrily when they saw this. Malfoy shook the memory ball in his hand and smiled sarcastically. If you want it, come and get it. Harry didn't hesitate when he heard it, and rushed out with Ron. Just as he ran to Malfoy, Malfoy smiled and threw the memory ball in his hand directly. Go on, Goyle. Hope narrowed his eyes slightly when he saw this, and his mind moved. Goyle, who was holding his hand high, seemed to kick something under his feet, staggered, and fell forward. Not good. Harry and Ron's face changed, and they couldn't help but exclaimed. Of course, they were not concerned about Malfoy's following Goyle, but the memory ball, which fell down because of Goyle's fall. Just when Harry and others thought that the memory ball was about to fall to the ground and break, a palm appeared out of nowhere and caught the falling memory ball steadily. Give it back to you. Hope stuffed the memory ball directly back into Neville's hand. To be honest, he could even foresee the trajectory of the memory ball falling with the treasure perception turned on, which was very accurate. Good job, Hope. Harry and Ron were relieved and shouted excitedly. But this move was met with Malfoy's cold eyes. Just when he was about to say something, Professor McGonagall was already walking towards this side. Seeing this, Malfoy could only snort coldly and leave with 2 followers. Thank you, Hope. Neville sincerely thanked Hope. It's okay. Hope casually patted Neville on the shoulder. After all, they were roommates. How could he see Neville being bullied like this? This was just a trivial matter in daily life. Hope was also a little helpless. It was only a few days after the start of school, and Malfoy was jumping up and down like a grasshopper. He was really energetic. After breakfast, they came to the classroom. As soon as they entered the classroom, they saw Snape with a gloomy face, looking at Harry affectionately, which made Harry secretly complain. Sure enough, as soon as the class started, Snape made things difficult for Harry. Hermione's hands were about to break the sky, but Snape still turned a blind eye and continued to love and kill Harry. After a class, even Hope was attacked from all directions. Fortunately, with Harry attracting firepower, life was finally better. However, Hermione seemed angry. She raised her hand for a whole class, but was completely ignored by Snape. After a class, Gryffindor was deducted a full 10 points. It was inevitable that she had emotions in her heart. Hope was also sure that she had no talent in this potion. Even if she had talent, with a professor like Snape, people would not have any interest in this course. He felt that he had been very restrained, otherwise he would have secretly resorted to trickery. Professors should indeed be respected by students, but Snape is definitely not in this range. Even Professor Quirrell, who was possessed by Voldemort, is many times better than Snape. Hope exhaled slightly, and was really disgusted. Snape not only attacked Harry, but also belittled everyone equally, except Malfoy. That's right, even Slytherin people were not immune to Snape's attacks, but Malfoy was indeed an exception. Hope couldn't help but think about one thing. During the years that Snape taught, didn't even the little lion who disregarded the school rules secretly put a sack on him when it was dark and windy? Could it be that Snape was very strong, or was he afraid of the school rules? Although such behavior might lead to expulsion. But as long as he was not found out, nothing would happen. Hope had already put this matter on the plan in his mind. He was not a little wizard, he had a mature soul in his body, so he couldn't stand such devaluation, or PUA. Degrading the little wizard to nothing, in order to satisfy some kind of pleasure in his heart? Anyway, Hope couldn't stand it. The school rules were nothing to him. If it was the laws of the Ministry of Magic, he would still have a little fear. Wait, Hope said secretly in his heart, sooner or later Snape would have a sack on his head. Read books every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 to get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 17. The first time. The first class in the afternoon was the flying class, which was the class Hope was looking forward to the most. Even though Hope was born in a wizard family, he had never touched a flying broom since he was a child, and had never experienced the feeling of flying. Mainly because Hanny did not use a flying broom on weekdays, so there was no such thing at home. In addition, Hanny was worried that Hope would use it without authorization, and if he was not careful, he might fall directly from a high altitude and lose half his life, so Hope had never felt the pleasure of flying. At this moment, Hope was holding the flying broom that Mrs. Hooch, the flying class professor, gave him with excitement. However, there were many cracks on the wooden handle of this flying broom, and it might be older than Hope. He was a little suspicious whether he would fall apart and fall from the sky while riding. Put the flying broom on the ground to your right, put your hand on the flying broom, and then shout, "Get up," loudly. Mrs. Hooch stood in front of everyone, said loudly, and then demonstrated. "Get up." The flying broom suddenly flew up from the ground and flew into Madame Hooch's hands. "That's it." Hope's eyes lit up, and he stretched out his hand eagerly, shouting loudly with expectation, "Get up." But the flying broom on the ground was like a lazy pig, slightly lifting its feet and perfunctorily doing it. This was not an abnormality. In fact, except for Harry and Malfoy, no one else succeeded once. He was still lucky, at least the flying broom was willing to perfunctorily do it in the midst of busyness. Hope narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the flying broom on the ground, feeling that the other party was too disrespectful to him. The treasure perception opened up at once, and he concentrated his perception on the flying broom. At this moment, the flying broom trembled slightly. If it had intelligence, it would definitely feel a pair of majestic eyes staring at it, making it instinctively afraid. It's a pity that it has no intelligence, but it has the spirituality of being a magic item. The next moment, before Hope could recite it again, it suddenly jumped up and flew into Hope's right hand. Seeing this, Hope immediately showed a trace of satisfaction. This is right. He felt that under the effect of treasure perception, his connection with these treasures would be deeper. Especially for this kind of treasure that has been mastered and is close enough, a layer of connection can be established by staring. In a trance, he seemed to feel the surrender of the flying broom in his hand, like a puppy shaking its tail. Of course, this is just a feeling. This flying broom does not have such advanced wisdom. After a while, many people have been able to control the flying broom. Of course, there are still some people who are fishing in troubled waters, such as Hermione, who was seen with a red face and holding a flying broom in her hand. And Hope just happened to see Hermione bending down to pick up the flying broom on the ground. I guess the temperature of her face should be enough to boil an egg at this moment, and she glanced around with a guilty conscience to make sure no one saw it. Not everyone is the protagonist in life, and there are so many spectators, but Hermione happens to be one of the protagonists in this world. Those eyes looked at Hope, and the teasing in Hope's eyes could be clearly seen. Hermione's eyes widened, and she turned her head suddenly, feeling that her head was already smoking. Then, under the order of Madame Hooch, they carried the flying brooms and sat on the wooden handle of the flying brooms with their buttocks, which was a little bit uncomfortable. At least sitting on the flying broom for a long time would hurt the buttocks. Maybe he should add a comfortable seat to the flying broom? An idea came to Hope's mind, but this flying broom was not his, but a public one. Then, under their control, the flying broom took them up slightly, and they could sit steadily on the wooden handle with their feet still touching the ground. Wait until I count down to 3, 2, 1 and blow the whistle, and you will push up hard. Do you hear me clearly? Hooch continued to teach and began to count down. 3. However, just as the countdown began, Neville, who was next to Ron, had already kicked his feet hard, and his body flew directly into the sky under the power of the flying broom. Ah! A call sounded, but Neville was not sitting on it, and the flying broom had already turned upside down, looking down from above. I saw Neville staring at his feet and exerting force in the air, holding the wooden handle of the flying broom with both hands. It was just that the flying broom turned and threw Neville directly from the air. Neville! Harry's face changed when he saw this, and he shouted loudly. However, it did not slow down the speed of falling at all. At this critical moment, Hope's mind moved. Bang! Neville fell to the ground, and a big pit was smashed on the ground. Hope also hurried over and saw that the ground was like a swamp, and Neville easily smashed a deep pit. But Neville's face was still a little pale. I don't know if he was scared or. Madame Hooch had already checked, but found that he was only slightly injured, and was relieved immediately, but she finally took Neville to the school hospital. A group of little wizards were left at the scene to move freely. Ha ha ha, did you see just now, his pants were almost kicked off, so white. Malfoy began to taunt. Harry and Ron suddenly had a glimmer of fire in their eyes and began to confront. From Neville's just-changed incident, Hope suddenly thought of something, sitting on the wooden handle of the flying broom with his feet slightly raised. Sensing the memory ball left by Neville on the ground, he drove the flying broom to fly slowly at a low altitude, like riding a children's tricycle. Coming to the top of the memory ball on the ground, he immediately bent down and stretched out his hand to pick it up. However, at this moment, a figure passed by at a very fast speed, and Hope could only see an afterimage. A hand reached out to the place he was about to touch, and intercepted the memory ball in advance. Hope looked up and saw Malfoy riding a flying broom in the air with a proud look on his face, holding the memory ball in his hand. Isn't this the boy's glass ball? Whoever picks it up will get it. Malfoy said jokingly. You! Harry glared with anger in his eyes, and was about to fly to the sky when he was stopped by Hermione in time. Mrs. Hooch asked us to stay where we are. You will cause Gryffindor to lose points if you do this. Hermione urged urgently, but Harry Potter obviously would not listen. So Harry flew up to the sky to chase Malfoy. Hope's eyes flickered slightly, and naturally he did not follow him to the sky. Instead, he got off the flying broom, stepped with his right foot, held the flying broom in his right hand, and stared at Malfoy, as if waiting for some opportunity. Harry is worthy of being a future Quidditch player. He is talented and seems very skilled when he rides a flying broom for the first time. Hope is not worried that Harry will not be able to catch up with Malfoy. Have fun reading every day during the 11th. Top up 100 and get 500 VIP points. Top up now, event time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 18 Loss of Control. Sure enough, Harry was getting closer and closer to Malfoy. Bring the stuff here. Harry said angrily, but Malfoy ignored him. Seeing this, Harry's eyes sank, and he drove the flying broom directly towards Malfoy, as if he wanted to die together. This scared Malfoy directly, and he threw the memory ball in his hand with force. Harry did not continue to entangle Malfoy, but chased the memory ball instead. Hope, who was watching this scene below, smiled slightly, and at some point, the flying broom in his hand began to tremble. No! It began to vibrate, like a car loaded with a motor, and like an angry wild horse. As Hope loosened his right hand, the flying broom suddenly rushed out, like a wild horse running away, and like a car out of control, flying towards the sky. The speed was extremely fast, and it was close to Malfoy in just a blink of an eye. Malfoy had a triumphant smile on his face as he watched Harry chasing after him. Thanks to his masterpiece, Harry could not catch the glass ball. With a smile on his face, his eyes fell on Harry, who was running at high speed, and he did not notice that a broomstick was flying towards him on the ground. When he felt something in his peripheral vision, he turned his head with a little confusion, and saw an unmanned broomstick rushing towards him, only 1 meter away from him. "Be careful." Pansy Parkinson from Slytherin College on the ground saw this scene and warned sharply. But it was too late. The wooden handle of the broomstick was like a stick, stabbing Malfoy's mandible under his chin. With a severe pain, he felt dizzy, and Malfoy directly let go of his hands holding the broomstick. His body was knocked out, separated from the broomstick, and fell directly to the ground. Bang! Hope fell heavily to the ground, raising a layer of dust, and the sound of heavy objects falling to the ground was very dull. Only the ground was grass, otherwise this would be enough for Malfoy to suffer for a while. Ah! A sharp scream sounded, and Malfoy covered his arm with a pale face. Malfoy's right forearm was twisted in an unreasonable posture, and the picture was really scary, which made Hope raise his eyebrows. Then, accompanied by a scream, some little girls had closed their eyes and dared not look directly at this picture. Hope shook his head slightly. If these little wizards had mastered the levitation spell, Malfoy would not be in this state. It turned out that learning is still useful. As long as there is an experienced wizard like Professor McGonagall who knows the levitation spell, he can use the levitation spell to catch Malfoy. Although the levitation spell cannot be used on people, it can be used on clothes, which can greatly slow down the falling speed, and there will be nothing in the end. As for why Neville fell from the air when Madame Hooch was present. This is enough to show the level of Madame Hooch. "Mr. Hop." Suddenly a cold voice sounded from behind Hop, startling him and causing goosebumps to appear instantly. Hop looked back and saw Professor McGonagall, who had appeared out of nowhere, staring at him seriously. But after just a glance, she quickly walked to the screaming Malfoy. Seeing Malfoy's injury, Professor McGonagall's face suddenly became ugly, and then she cast a floating spell on Malfoy. "Mr. Hope, help send Mr. Malfoy to the school hospital. And you, Mr. Harry, come too." Professor McGonagall's voice was cold, but she specifically mentioned Hope's name. This made Hope suspect that Professor McGonagall had just witnessed everything. It was not doubt, but certainty. "I immediately walked over honestly, pulled Malfoy's other arm and pulled him up from the ground." With this movement, Malfoy screamed again, his golden back hair was very messy, and there was a bean-sized cold sweat on his forehead, and his little face was twisted. Looking at Malfoy's appearance, Hope did not have any sympathy, but felt a little funny. Malfoy, who usually bullies others, is still like a normal person when encountering things. I thought he would maintain the quality of a pure-blood wizard. Professor McGonagall, all this is because Malfoy picked up Neville's memory ball and refused to return it. Hermione ran out to explain anxiously when she saw this. "Miss Granger, I will take care of this matter. Before that, please let me send Malfoy to the school hospital." Seeing the only little witch in the academy who made her feel at ease, Professor McGonagall's tone also eased a little. Then several people walked towards the school hospital under the leadership of Professor McGonagall. Harry did not help, but followed behind Hope. As for Ron, he wanted to follow, but seeing Professor McGonagall's expression, he instinctively chose to be timid. On the way, he met many students who were curiously observing, but one by one they felt Professor McGonagall's aura and wisely did not approach. However, some people were communicating secretly, such as the Weasley twins, who smiled when they saw Malfoy's appearance. Although they did not dare to approach, they winked at Harry from a distance, trying to satisfy their gossip. However, seeing Harry's appearance, they immediately guessed that all this was related to Harry Hope, and secretly gave them a thumbs up. It was not until Professor McGonagall stopped and glanced at the Weasley twins coldly that they were startled and scattered. Arriving at the school hospital, Madame Hooch's face changed when she saw Malfoy in such a state. She didn't expect that there would be 2 injured people in the first flying class for freshmen. This was too unlucky. Malfoy was finally sent to the ward, on the bed next to Neville. Professor McGonagall, this flying class is too dangerous. Maybe freshmen shouldn't be allowed to take flying classes. Madame Pomfrey couldn't help but complain to Professor McGonagall. In her opinion, even dangerous sports like Quidditch should be banned. I'll consider it, Madame Pomfrey. Please treat Mr. Malfoy first. Knowing Madame Pomfrey's temper, Professor McGonagall didn't say much. You two come out. Professor McGonagall whispered to Hope and Harry, as if she could hear her anger. In a blink of an eye, Hope and Harry stood honestly in the corridor outside the ward, and opposite them was Professor McGonagall. Tell me, Mr. Hope. Professor McGonagall first pointed the finger at Hope. She saw from a distance that the flying broom in Hope's hand crashed directly into Malfoy, which caused this disaster. The flying broom is out of control, Professor McGonagall. It seems that it has been used for too long and may have a malfunction. Hope shrugged and said innocently. Reading is fun every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 and get 500 VIP points. Recharge now, event time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 19 Visit. If he didn't have the treasure perception, it would be difficult to do that. How can a car move in the predetermined direction without the driver? It is precisely because of the deep connection he has established with the flying broom that it can still move forward accurately even if it is out of control, but of course this cannot last. So it is impossible for him to be caught and proved. It is more reasonable to think that the accident was caused by the aging of the flying broom than to think that he has such means. Professor McGonagall did not speak, but looked at Hope deeply, trying to see something from Hope's face, but the result obviously disappointed her. The school's flying broom has indeed been used for many years, but there has been no funds to repurchase it. I hope that this time Lucius can realize the necessity of repairing teaching aids. Professor McGonagall sighed slightly and determined the result. Then he looked at Harry. Compared with Hope, Harry was obviously a little nervous. Seeing Professor McGonagall, he hurriedly explained, Professor McGonagall, I just wanted to get back Neville's memory ball. It was taken away by Malfoy. Professor McGonagall didn't care about this matter, and asked, Mr. Potter, is this your first time using a flying broom? Harry was a little confused by this question and nodded without knowing why. Hope obviously saw a hint of surprise in Professor McGonagall's eyes, but this surprise was insignificant compared to her serious face. Professor McGonagall looked at Malfoy in the ward with a little hesitation. She wanted to take Harry to see Gryffindor Quidditch Captain Wood immediately, but now was obviously not the time to leave. You leave first. Professor McGonagall said immediately. I want to see Neville, okay? Harry did not choose to leave immediately, but said instead. Of course. Hearing this, Professor McGonagall finally smiled. Hope and Harry entered the ward. Neville was fine. He just fell and got a little scared. He felt much better after drinking some sedatives. As for Malfoy, he lay on the bed with a pale face. He had stopped screaming and was covered in sweat. When he saw them coming in, he looked at Harry viciously. Hope felt relieved. Sure enough, Harry took all the responsibility. Looking at Malfoy's resentful and hateful eyes, he obviously blamed Harry for all the faults. Malfoy opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but looking at Professor McGonagall on the side, he didn't say it in the end. With the permission of Madame Pomfrey, Hope and Harry took Neville away. This matter was temporarily over. The next day, Hope heard the news from the Weasley twins. Malfoy's father Lucius ran to the principal's office and had a tantrum, even asking Dumbledore to be responsible. In the end, he was dismissed by Dumbledore with a light sentence. Lucius, I'm sorry for Mr. Draco Malfoy's injury, but it was just an accident. The broomstick was out of control due to aging. Minerva proposed to replace a batch of new broomsticks at the school board meeting last year, but you refused. Just one sentence made Lucius' face turn blue with anger. So it was he who made his son's matter happen. In view of Mr. Draco Malfoy's experience, I think the replacement of the broomstick must be put on the agenda. I have sent a letter to each member of the school board. I believe you will receive it when you return home. In the end, Lucius left the principal's office angrily, took Draco Malfoy with him, and went home to recover. Whether it was Harry or Ron, they seemed very happy about such things. Time turned to noon. After lunch, they returned to the dormitory. Harry was called away by Professor McGonagall. When Harry came back, Ron asked Harry. As Hope thought, Harry met Wood and joined the Quidditch team. It was unprecedented for a first-year student to join the Quidditch college team, which made Ron happy. There are no classes in the afternoon, how should we arrange it? Ron said excitedly. I'm going to Hagrid in the afternoon. Harry said with a little embarrassment. Can I go with you? Ron said first. No problem, I don't think Hagrid will mind. Harry agreed directly, and then felt a hot gaze. He turned his head and saw Hope looking straight at him, and immediately asked tentatively. Hope, why don't you go with us? Okay. Seeing that Harry was so tactful, Hope immediately agreed. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the three appeared in front of a small house on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. After they entered the hut, Harry introduced Hagrid to them. Hagrid naturally knew the red-haired Weasley and was very familiar with Ron. When he introduced Hope, Hagrid looked at Hope with a little surprise, stretched out his big palm and shook Hope's small hand. I know you, a real Gryffindor. This sentence immediately made Hope laugh and cry. She didn't expect that she already had a title like the boy who survived. Oh. Your mother is Hanny Max. I remember that she was a beautiful little girl. Hagrid recalled that his memory of Hanny was still when Hanny was in school. After the introduction, Hagrid immediately cared about Harry's life this week, while Hope wandered around the hut alone, looking at the magic materials everywhere. However, his level was limited and he couldn't recognize these things, but this didn't prevent Hope from being surprised. These things symbolized magical creatures. After an unknown amount of time, Hagrid stood behind Hope and shouted, Hope, you seem to be very interested in these things? Yes, I'm very curious about magical animals. These things should all come from magical animals. Hagrid was no longer sleepy when he mentioned this, especially when he heard Hope was very interested, and he immediately introduced them to Hope. Most of these magic materials were given by others, which was related to Hagrid's wide circle of friends. With so many friends, he received a lot of things. As Hagrid introduced, Hope was also amazed, feeling that there was everything here, which was really a treasure trove for him. The young teeth of the three-headed dog, the horns of the unicorn, the crab shells of the fire crabs, the tail hair of the centaur, the feathers of the hippogriff, etc. In a blink of an eye, an afternoon passed, and Hope and his friends returned to the castle with reluctance, feeling that this afternoon was very fulfilling. After dinner, Hope did not go back with Harry and others, but went down the stairs to the basement of Hogwarts. There is not only the Slytherin common room here, but also the kitchen. Enjoy reading every day during the National Day holiday. Top up 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Top up now, activity time, October 1st to October 7th. Chapter 20 The Unexpected. As soon as he walked in, Hope felt an endless sense of security in his heart, because this place was underground, and that was his territory. He could bury the whole place with just a thought. If he encountered danger, he could just run here and be safe. The passage here was more damp and dirty than other places. He came to the kitchen along the passage. The kitchen was located just below the auditorium, and the food in the auditorium was usually delivered from bottom to top through the kitchen. As soon as he came in, he saw many busy house elves working hard, using magic to make the kitchen utensils move by themselves. Seeing Hope's arrival, these house elves turned their heads and looked at Hope curiously. Mr. Wizard, what can I do for you? A house elf immediately put down his work, ran to Hope, and asked respectfully, without looking down on him because of Hope's age. I want to find Byton. Hope said simply. As soon as this sentence came out, one of the many house elves came out and said, Mr. Hope, are you looking for me? Hope immediately nodded with a smile on his face. In fact, he didn't know whether this house elf was bitten. These house elves all look the same, and no one can recognize them. Bitten then took Hope to a slightly quieter place, a compartment. Mr. Hope, do you have anything to do with me? Bitten asked curiously, he couldn't think of what Hope would want to do with him. "It's been a long time since I last saw you. I wanted to see how you've been recently. It seems that you're doing well. I also brought you a gift." Hope reached into the purse that had cast the traceless extension spell and took out a handful of snacks. Is this for me?" Bidden stared with his huge eyes full of surprise, and said in disbelief. This is the first time he has received a gift from a little wizard. As Hope nodded affirmatively, Bidden's eyes suddenly became tearful. He took it excitedly and jumped happily on the spot. "Mr. Hope, you are the best wizard I have ever seen except Dumbledore. No one has ever given me a gift alone. It was just a little snack, even a little scattered, and it was not carefully packed in a gift box, but Bidden's excitement could be felt. This made Hope feel a little ashamed, and a trace of remorse flashed in his heart, but it disappeared in an instant. "We are friends, isn't it normal to give gifts?" Hope asked sincerely, as if the domineering male president directly and domineeringly announced that she was my girlfriend without consent. "Friend? I am Mr. Hope's friend?" Bidden looked at Hope in shock. Hope finally understood why, as humanoid magical creatures, goblins have certain freedoms, but house elves have become slaves of wizards. It turns out that they are so easy to deceive. However, Hope accidentally heard an old rumor from Hanny. The house elves used to exist independently, stronger and more prosperous than human wizards, and even posed enough threat to wizards. At that time, the relationship between wizards and house elves was not relaxed, but a deadly enemy relationship. It was because of this relationship that the wizards and house elves broke out in a war, and the wizards won in the end. In order to prevent the house elves from posing a threat in the future, slaves were specially domesticated. After a long time, the bottom culture of a group was completely changed, so that the house elves instinctively believed that they were born to be slaves of wizards. Of course, Hope didn't know whether this was true. Then Hope didn't get straight to the point, but chatted with Bitten about family matters and asked about Bitten's daily life. Until the atmosphere was almost brewing, Hope showed his true colors and got straight to the point. "Bitten, can you give me some of your nails? I like collecting things about magical creatures recently." "Of course, no problem, Mr. Hope." Without any hesitation, Byton picked out a little nail from his finger under Hope's guidance, and Hope held it directly in his palm. With the things in hand, Hope said goodbye to Byton directly. Byton did not doubt him and said goodbye to Hope warmly. In fact, Hope actually wanted to ask Hogwarts about the source of food raw materials, but he thought it would be better to wait until the relationship was consolidated next time before making plans. After leaving the kitchen, he went back to the first floor along the stairs. Feeling the touch of the palm, he said directly in his heart, "Fusion." Detected fusionable items, started the analysis task. Current fusion item, House Elf. Analysis difficulty, B level. Analysis progress, 1 out of 5,000. Current extraction characteristics, 1, Life Expert. Life Expert, handy for daily life magic. Note, the degree of this characteristic is linked to the analysis progress. When the analysis is completed, the 10,000 times characteristic can be obtained. Current analysis efficiency, increase by 1 point per day, and the analysis progress can be improved through related tasks. Hope stopped in his tracks and opened his mouth wide. What the hell is this? Hope never thought that the analyzed trait would be this. Life Expert? Could it be that his future career direction is to compete with house elves for food? Become the butler of a certain manor, the world's first wizard manservant? Hope was a little speechless, but since he had already drawn this trait, there was no other way. Continue walking down the stairs towards the Gryffindor common room. While checking the exclusive tasks. Exclusive task, cooking food. Get 1 progress point for each food you make. Note, this task is an exclusive task for integrating house elves. Oh. Hope raised his eyebrows. This task was unexpectedly simple. He didn't need to think much to know how to steal the chicken. Making food 5,000 times is actually quite simple, especially in this country of simple food. Even a proper lunch would not be too difficult. Heat 2 pieces of bread, put a piece of bacon on it, spread butter on it, and cover it up, isn't it done? Of course, Hope has a simpler way, just boil the eggs directly in boiling water. How long will it take to boil eggs in boiling water? Thinking of this, Hope couldn't help but touch his chin. He just didn't know if boiling 5,000 eggs at a time could directly reach the full progress. If he counted, it would be even simpler. Although Hope was not very satisfied with the characteristics extracted this time, after all, the task was simple and it was estimated that it would not take much time to complete, so he was very happy. This characteristic seemed to be earned for nothing, and he would not suffer any loss. The next day soon arrived, and Hope was going to find Baiton again today, striving to successfully fuse the house elf within one day and increase the characteristics to 10,000 times. Read books every day on the 11th. Recharge 100 to get 500 VIP points. Recharge now. Activity time, October 1st to October 7th. You are listening to it in Eugene Light Novels.